Hello, welcome back to the winter collection. And this is the most wintry part because today we're going to do a programme that's devoted to comfort food and starting off with casseroles and braised dishes. But if you haven't made a casserole before, I just want to run through some of the important points. The recipe I'm going to show you first is braised lamb with flageolet beans. And what I've got here in my pan is little nuggets, neck fillet. It's not an expensive cut, but it's absolutely superb for casseroling and braising. And I've been browning this, and that's the first principle of casseroling and braising, is that sometimes you need to brown the meat. Because what happens is you seal in the juices, it goes into a hot pan, you seal in the juices, and all this lovely sort of crusty bit that forms while you're sealing in the juices gives you lots of flavour to the finished casserole. And so here it is, 2 pounds of neck of lamb fillets nicely browned, and now what I'm going to do is put about a tablespoon of oil. It had 1 tablespoon to brown, and now I'm adding another tablespoon, and what I'm next going to do is add some onions to the pan. And what I've got here are 2 large onions, and they've been sliced, and then the slice is cut in half. Quite thickly, about ½ an inch thick. And what's going to happen now is really they're going to have the same treatment. They're going to be browned in the pan because what happens with onions, when you brown them and they become toasted at the edges, they give a lovely, lovely flavour to the finished sauce. Now while they're browning, I'm going to show you the next ingredient, and these are flageolet beans. And flageolet beans are beans that are harvested when they're young and green and then dried. And one of the good things about using pulses like this in casseroles is that the pulses, as well as having flavour of their own, absorb the meat flavours. And so you can actually, if you use pulses, you can actually make the meat go a lot further. Now what you do with those is you soak them overnight in cold water, and they then absorb some of the water and become much bigger. Or if you forget to soak them overnight, you can just pop them into a saucepan, cover them with water, bring them up to the boil, and boil them for 10 minutes and leave them for 2 hours to soak, and they'll look the same. Once the onions have browned, you then add 2 cloves of garlic, finely chopped, and let those just cook for a minute with the onion juices. And then I just want to explain to you about thickening. To thicken the sauce, you add some flour at this stage. And I've got here 1 ounce of flour. And what you do is just sprinkle it in, and then just turn it around in the pan and just let the flour sort of soak up the juices. And although it looks sort of lumpy and not very nice at this stage, don't get into a panic because all will be well later on. Next we need some stock, and here I've got a pint of lamb stock, and I'm just going to gradually stir in the stock into the onion and flour mixture. And if you think I've been very caring and devoted and standing making stock with lamb bones, you're wrong. I actually got 2 tubs of lamb stock from the supermarket, and that's one of the things that's very nice about cooking now in the 90s, is that you can go and buy stock ready-made, which is very helpful. Next I'm going to return the meat, the browned meat, to the pan, followed by the soaked flageolet beans. They're going to go in next. And we'll just give them a little stir to get them down into the juices. And I'm going to add some pepper now, but no salt. And that's a little rule to remember. When you're using pulses, don't season with salt until after, because what we want is for them to absorb the juices, and the salt discourages that. So we'll just give it a nice seasoning of freshly milled pepper. Salt comes later. Now a couple of bay leaves, and I've got here a dessert spoon of fresh chopped thyme leaves, and the thyme and the lamb have a wonderful affinity. Just a few little sprigs of thyme too, just scattered here and there over the surface. You can see it's come back to simmering point now. A lid goes on, and then it's transferred into a preheated oven, gas mark 1 or the equivalent, and the first stage of the cooking is 1.5 hours. Well, now 1.5 hours is up, and the next thing is I'm going to add one more ingredient. And that ingredient will just finish off the sauce nicely. This is ½ a pound of cherry tomatoes, and what I've done with these is I've just put them into boiling water, counted 30 seconds, and then just slipped off the skins. And what they will do now is just cook down into the sauce and give a lovely enrichment to it. And it'll need another hour. Here it is, 2.5 hours cooking all together. And remember, what you need to do before you serve it is give it a good salting and taste it to check that you've got enough salt, because we didn't put any salt in the beginning. And the good news about this is, don't be deceived by its simplicity, and don't be tempted to do what I have done, and that is cook it with wine, because it doesn't taste any better cooked with wine. Just leave it simple like this. So that's it, braised lamb with flageolets. Well, today I'm going to show you what I consider to be my own top 10 collection of casseroles and braised dishes, and the next one certainly belongs to that category. This is braised meatballs in goulash sauce. First, you need 12 ounces each of minced pork and beef, 1 small onion and ½ a red pepper finely chopped, 2 ounces of breadcrumbs, a crushed clove of garlic, 2 tablespoons of fresh chopped parsley and an egg. Season well with salt and pepper, and then mix all these very thoroughly together. Then shape into 24 small rounds, coat with flour and fry in hot oil. Once they're brown all over, remove them to a plate, then in the same pan begin to make the goulash sauce. First by adding some more oil, then the other half of the red pepper finely chopped and a large onion finely chopped. Cook these for about 5 minutes, then add 1 pound of peeled chopped ripe tomatoes and a rounded tablespoon of hot Hungarian paprika. Now return the meatballs to the pan containing the sauce, cover and cook very slowly for 1.5 hours at gas mark 1 or the equivalent. Finally, add some creme fraiche to the sauce, a little bit more paprika, and serve the meatballs on spinach noodles tossed in butter and poppy seeds. Well, one of the special joys of cooking is that very often you get a visual feast as well as an edible feast. And the next recipe I want to show you, which is braised steak with 5 kinds of mushrooms, begins with a visual feast, and that is how very, very beautiful mushrooms are. In fact, I think a lot of food is a work of art all by itself. Now, the first kind of mushrooms in our group of 5 is this one here. This one is dark gilled mushrooms, nice flat dark gilled mushrooms, which give a really good flavour, much better than the boring little button mushrooms. The next one, these are chestnut mushrooms, and these are actually all available in the supermarket, but I've been this morning to a supermarket supplier who's picked these fresh for me. Now, when they've been on the shelf a little while, they look sort of brown like this, but when they're freshly picked in the morning, they look pink. But these are chestnut mushrooms, that's the second kind. And then we need some wild mushrooms to give that lovely intense flavour, to back up the other flavours. And these are actually porcini mushrooms. And porcini mushrooms have been gathered in their season and then dried, and they're soaked, as we did in the second programme in the series. So that's porcini. Next, we're going to be a little bit oriental and look at oyster mushrooms. And there are 2 kinds of oyster mushrooms. They're the blue kind, and these are very, very pretty. They're sort of grey blue and have lovely, lovely white gills on them. And they also come in this colour, yellow oyster mushrooms. And again, the beauty of it, when you see the light coming through the gills and this lovely splash of colour, it really is quite extraordinary. And still keeping with the Eastern flavour, the last kind of mushrooms we've got are these. These are shiitake mushrooms, and they're also very, very beautiful. If you pick one up and look at it straight on, it looks like a little Chinese coolie hat and has all these beautiful patterns on top of it. And so there we have the 5 kinds of mushrooms. Now we'll make the recipe. What I've done over here is in my frying pan, I've been browning some braising steak, and I've got 2 pounds of braising steak. This recipe can serve either 4 or 6 people, depending how much steak you want. And then, after browning the braising steak, I added a little bit more oil, and I've browned the onions. And I've got 2 onions here, and they've just been cut into chunks like this and nicely tinged brown at the edges. Now, what I've got in my frying pan here is the residue and the oil left over from frying the meat and the onions, and I've added a knob of butter to that. And now I'm just going to begin to make the sauce by adding some flour to that, just to make the basis of the sauce. And the flour is going to be mixed into the fat, and then I'm going to gradually add some liquid. And the first lot of liquid I'm going to add, you remember the porcini mushrooms? We've used ½ an ounce of porcini, and they've been soaked in warm water and then strained and chopped. And this is the soaking water, and the soaking water is wonderful, beautiful, porcini flavoured stock. So that's going to go in now. Little by little, stirring all the time. Now, halfway through adding the porcini stock, you need to switch from a wooden spoon to this, which is a balloon whisk. Right, then as soon as the last of the porcini stock has been incorporated, we're now going to add another ingredient, a very special ingredient, and that is this, which is Madeira wine. And that's going to go in a little at a time. And this is dry Madeira. It's sometimes called Cercial, sometimes just called Special. But it's got a lovely nutty flavour, and somehow or other the flavour of Madeira and mushrooms is just out of this world. They have an incredible affinity, Madeira and mushrooms, especially when they're cooked long and slow together, which is what we're going to do here. So as soon as all the Madeira has been incorporated, now the sauce is smooth, you can add a bit more. The next thing we're going to do is just return the meat to the sauce. And so we'll just put that in now. 4 pieces of meat. And as I said before, this can serve 4 to 6 people. If you want to trim it down into 6, it depends how much meat you like to eat. Followed by the onions, which I'm just going to place around the meat. They've already been browned. And then what's left on my meat plate here are lots of lovely juices. So they're going to be incorporated next. Put the juices in. Finally, the soaked porcini mushrooms, they're going to be sprinkled in. So this is the first of our mushroom group of 5, and they go in at the beginning with a few sprigs of thyme and a bay leaf, and then good seasoning of salt and some freshly milled pepper. As soon as that comes up to simmering point, put a lid on, and then you put it into a really slow oven, just 130 degrees, and that'll take 1.5 hours for its initial cooking time. Then, after 1.5 hours, you add the second batch of mushrooms. In this case, it's 4 ounces of the chestnut mushrooms and 4 ounces of the dark gilled mushrooms. And obviously, cooking the steak in Madeira like this, what I'm now going to do is just spoon a little bit of the juices over the mushrooms. So there we are. Now we're going to put the lid back on, and that's going to go back into this very, very low oven and have another 1.5 hours cooking before the last part of the recipe. Just before you serve your braised steak with mushrooms and Madeira, You put a crushed clove of garlic and an ounce of butter in a pan like this, and then finally 6 ounces of shiitake mushrooms and 6 ounces of mixed oyster mushrooms. And we've got that lovely garlic flavoured butter there, and all I'm going to do is just toss these around in the garlic butter and let them cook very briefly, no longer than about 2 minutes altogether, and then they're just used as a garnish. You'll see that I've sliced them all, but I've left 1 or 2 whole ones here because it's quite nice to just have 1 or 2 whole ones to use for the garnish. Serve the steak, garnished with the mushrooms, and then just finally pour the sauce all over. Well, one of the good things about cold, icy weather is it gives me an excuse to make one of the great classic British dishes of all time, and that is steak and kidney pudding, or as it was affectionately known in the East End of London, Kate and Sydney. Well, we're going to make a classic steak and kidney pudding today, and first of all I just want to run through the ingredients. On the plate here I've got the said steak and kidney. And I just want to tell you that the good thing about this is that it has all the lovely beefy flavours. So essential is ox kidney. No other kind of kidney will do it, must be ox kidney. And then you need a cut of braising steak or braising beef, rather like this. This is actually chuck, but what you need is a little bit of marbling of fat in it, which will make the whole thing nice and juicy and succulent when it's cooked. But first of all, I want to show you how to make suet pastry for the steak and kidney pudding. And it's the easiest pastry in the world. You start off, in this case, with 3/4 pound of self-raising flour. Give it a good sifting, as I've shown you before, holding the sieve up high to give it a plenty of airing. And remember, it must be self-raising flour, it won't work with plain flour. Then what I'm going to do is give the flour a seasoning of salt and pepper, because this gives a nice sort of savoury touch to it. And then the next ingredient is half the flour's quantity, in this case 6 ounces, of shredded beef suet. So the beef suet goes in, and the easy bit is there's no rubbing in this one. All you do is take a knife and just mix the suet into the flour, and as soon as it looks sort of evenly blended, then you start to go in with some cold water. And just add a few drops of cold water and start to mix again with your knife, just using cutting movements and turning the mixture round. And the aim is to bring it all together to a dough that will eventually leave the bowl clean. Well, you can see that's quite lumpy, but I don't have anywhere near enough water. And you saw I was quite sort of bold pouring the water in. Well, in fact, suet pastry does take a lot more water than when you're making other kinds of pastry like short crust. Now it's beginning to get a little bit claggy, so what I'm now going to do is get rid of the knife and then go in with my hands and just bring it all together. And again, you can see there isn't enough water, so in we go again. What we want to end up with is a really nice elastic dough that leaves the bowl clean. Now what we need to do is, before we roll that out, is just take 1/4 of the pastry away, because that's going to form the lid. And then the next bit will have to be rolled out, ready to line the pudding basin. Now let me just show you the pudding basin first. Well, this one actually is 2.5 pints capacity, but when you're buying one in the shop, you can't really very easily measure it. So if you measure it across like that, 6.5 inches in diameter. And then, as you can see, it needs to be well buttered, the pudding basin. Well, now we're going to roll the suet pastry out, which is very easy to do. Floured surface, then flour your rolling pin. Have a nice straight-sided rolling pin without any handles, and just give it equal pressure with your hands at each end. And if you want a round, as we do, just get rid of that knife there, which is in the way, give it a 1/4 turn every now and then, and you'll see that it'll roll out into a round. It's very, very easy, very well-behaved pastry, suet pastry. It doesn't actually crack or give you any problems at all. This needs to be about 13 inches in diameter. And then it's almost there, I think. I'm using guesswork. Forgot to bring the measure. And then you just use that to line the pudding basin. So in it goes. And what you need to do here is it's like a sort of a tuck job, really. A squeezing and a tucking. Just press it in. It's terribly, terribly easy to do. Won't cause you any problems at all. And if you find you've got some thinner bits of pastry round the walls of the bowl, then you can just do a bit of patching with a bit left over. But this has gone in quite evenly, I think. But what I will do is some of these little bits at the edge here, I'm just going to take off and just give the pudding right at the base a little bit of reinforcement. Because although it's not traditional to turn a steak and kidney pudding out, I like to turn it out. I like to be different. So there we are. There's the pudding basin lined. Now that is going to need the steak and kidney. So let me just run through what the ingredients are. 1.5 pounds of beef, which has been trimmed. 8 ounces of ox kidney cut very small, and a medium onion. And that's now going to have 2 tablespoons, level tablespoons of flour. And it's going to be coated in the flour, which has been seasoned with salt and pepper, well seasoned. So that's the seasoning. And then all you do is you just pile that straight into the basin with the pastry lining and pack it in, pack it down tight. And then once it's all in, the next thing you need to do is provide some gravy. Now this is provided by this, which is just plain water. And what you do is you add enough water to just come up to the top of the meat. Wait a few seconds and let it sink down, because you want it to come right up to the top. And you don't actually need to use stock. You can use plain water here, because the gravy that comes from steak and kidney is just sensational. It really is. A few drops of Worcester sauce now, about a teaspoonful. And the next thing is I'm just going to dampen the edges of the pastry like this with my fingers. And then I'm going to just roll out the lid. And that's quite easy to do. Just roll it out again to a round, giving a few quarter turns till it looks, need a bit more flour on my rolling pin, until it looks big enough to go on the top. There we are. So then that goes on the top, and then where we put the water, we just seal it. If you've got some bits lapping over, don't worry, just tuck them in like that. And that's now ready to go into the steamer. So what you need to do before it actually goes into the steamer is protect the surface of the pudding. And what you do to do that is take a double square of kitchen foil and cover the pudding with it, but make a pleat in the centre first, because it's lovely and fluffy suet pastry when it's steamed, and it does rise up. So you need that little bit of pleat there to give it room to expand. And then tie it with string and make yourself a little handle like this, because when it's finished steaming, it's quite hot, and that just helps you to pull it out. Now, a steak and kidney pudding needs 5 hours steaming, but don't throw your hands up in horror, because there's nothing to do. You just leave it in the kitchen and come back at half time and pour some more hot water into the steamer if it needs it. And then it's all ready to serve, no last minute preparation. It's quite an easy thing, really. And if you're worried about steam in the kitchen from one pudding, if you just have a window open, you won't really have any bother. So in it goes, into the steamer. This is an old-fashioned kitchen steamer, not very expensive. You can use a fan steamer if you want to, but either way, 5 hours. Right, now the 5 hours is up, and the aroma is very, very tantalising. So what we need to do now is just have a look at it. Turn the heat out, and protect your hands carefully because it is hot. But don't forget, we've got the little piece of string to help us lift it out of the steamer. And that's why we had the pleat, so that it had room to kind of rise up. So now what we're going to do is take the string off and pull the foil off. Normally you'd wrap the pudding, traditionally rather, you'd wrap the pudding in a white linen napkin, carry it to the table in all its splendour and spoon it out. But I want you to have a look at it, so I'm going to turn it out. And in our house, we actually like to turn it out. So what you do first of all then is go round it with a palette knife and loosen the pastry from the edges of the bowl, like that. Need a good wide bladed palette knife. Feel it loosen out. And then say a little prayer, and out it comes. And then take it to the table, steaming away like that, and see all the glory of that lovely juicy meat and all the gravy inside. So there it is. Kate and Sydney make a comeback. But now I've shown you how to make suet pastry, I'd like to show you another cold weather comfort food, another way of using it, and that is to make crusted dumplings. This is what they look like, same suet pastry but half the quantity, and adding 3 tablespoons of fresh chopped parsley. Shape them into rounds, pop them into the casserole, and then, without a lid, cook them for 30 minutes at gas mark 6. And now I just want to show you the complete winter collection of the top 10 braised dishes and casseroles. The first one I'm going to show you is a braised pot roast. This is good because it allows you to use the cuts of meat that aren't tender enough for plain roasting. This is in red wine and served with an onion marmalade. This is a braised version of a French classic, steak au poivre. This is braising steak with a pepper crust, slowly braised with red wine. This one is slowly braised oxtail in dark stout, and it's got mushrooms and cannelloni beans. The beans soak up all the lovely oxtail flavours. This one here is chili con carne with a difference. This has black beans instead of red beans, is garnished at the end with a spoonful of creme fraiche and a chilled avocado salsa. This is a traditional Flemish recipe, carbonade of beef. It's beef braised in beer, topped with croutons and melting cheese. I'm going to be showing you this in a later programme. Remember this one from our first programme? Braised pork in cider vinegar sauce, served with spiced red cabbage and cranberries. My own particular favourite casserole here, this is a traditional Irish stew with crusted dumplings. Braised neck of lamb with flageolet beans. Meatballs and goulash sauce, and finally braised steak with 5 kinds of mushrooms in a rich Madeira sauce. Right, well that's the complete winter collection for carnivores, that is. If you come back next time, there's a programme called The Souffle and the Winter Vegetarian. See you then. Hello again, and welcome to a programme which today is concentrating on vegetarian dishes. This is for vegetarians, for semi-vegetarians, or for people like me who often like to eat meals without any meat. Well, the first recipe I want to show you today is for a broccoli souffle with 3 cheeses, which is nice to serve on a special occasion. It'll serve 4 people as a first course or 2 people as a main course. Now you start off with 1 pound of broccoli. I trimmed the very thick stalky bits and then put it in a steamer and steamed it for about 6 to 10 minutes. It's got to be tender, but obviously not overcooked so that it retains its lovely sort of crispness and lovely colour. Then you pop it into a food processor and you end up with a puree, a thick, coarse puree like this. Or if you haven't got a food processor, you could use a potato masher. Now the next thing is the basis of the souffle. And the basis of it is a white sauce, sometimes called bechamel sauce. We've made this before in the series, but I'm just going to go over it with you. This is a very thick version, and it's made with 1 1/4 ounces of flour, 1 ounce of butter, and 1/4 pint of milk, and they have just been literally put in the saucepan over the heat, whisked together till you get this lovely thick, glossy paste. Now in my bowl here, I've got 3 egg yolks. And I'm just going to put this bechamel in to join the egg yolks. And then I'm going to add the broccoli into the bowl. And then the 3 cheeses I told you about. First of all, I've got strong cheddar here, 1 ounce of strong cheddar. I've got 1 tablespoon of Parmesan cheese. This is Parmigiano Reggiano, the real Parmesan cheese. And here I've got Gruyere cheese. This is another ounce of Gruyere cheese. Now I'm going to use some seasonings. I've got 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. That gives it a nice kick. Freshly grated nutmeg. Always, always freshly grated. Never, never buy it ready grated because you don't get the flavour. And what you want here is about 1/4 of a whole nutmeg grated. Then we need some salt and pepper, and you need quite a good seasoning of salt and pepper because we're actually going to be adding, we've got 3 egg yolks, remember, but we're going to be adding 5 egg whites. So to get the seasoning through that, you need to be quite heavy-handed with the seasoning. Now all we're going to do is just mix that all together and go in with your wooden spoon and just mix until everything's very, very, very thoroughly blended together. And that is the basis of the souffle. Now the next stage of the souffle making is the egg whites, so I'm just going to run through all the egg white rules for you. First of all, you need a large roomy bowl. Now in here I've got 5 egg whites, but first of all there is one important point to remember, and that is the bowl and the whisk must be absolutely grease-free. So you wash it in soapy water, rinse it in hot water, dry it with a clean tea cloth, and then if you want to be extra sure, you can just rub lemon round the whisk and round the bowl if you want to just make sure that you've got no grease, because grease stops the eggs from increasing in volume. Now what I'm going to do is beat them up, but start with the whisk very, very slowly, because that's the correct way to beat them. So just switch it on slowly. The main ingredient in a souffle obviously is air. And what we're trying to do now is incorporate as much air as we can. And what you'll see there are bubbles beginning to form. Now we're going to switch on to the higher speed. And what's happening in there is that little elastic bubbles are beginning to form as the air gets whipped in. And they begin to expand and expand. And the secret with egg whites is to get the bubbles to expand as much as they can without bursting. So if you underbeat them, you've got less air. And if you overbeat them and they burst, you've still got less air. And what we want is as much air as we can possibly get. And the way to tell if the egg whites are ready is that they should stand up in stiff peaks, like that. Now, the next thing we're going to do is just fold the egg whites into the original mixture. And I'm just going to swap my bowls over here and show you that, first of all, before you fold egg whites in, you need to just have 1 tablespoon, just 1 tablespoon, like that, to just slacken off the mixture. So you start with 1, and then you can have perhaps 2 or 3 lots to fold in. And you just use a cutting and folding movement. And the principles of folding egg whites is, again, centered on air, because you've got all those air bubbles and you don't want to lose them. So whatever you do, don't start mixing like this. That's disaster. So that's sort of loosened the mixture now, so we can go in with more egg whites, probably about 1/3 of them. Next, and then just carry on with these folding and cutting movements gently, just turning the mixture over like that. And just while I'm folding the last of the egg whites in, let me tell you, it works really well with Jerusalem artichokes. Just steamed and then chopped in the processor, and it works in the summer particularly well with courgettes. So there we are, little patience, and then all the egg whites have been folded into the mixture. And then the next thing I want to explain to you is a very, very important part of souffle making is the actual souffle dish itself. And this dish here, you'll see that it's quite small. In fact, it's only 5 inches in diameter. And what I've done is I've tied a collar of baking parchment round it, because I think it's nice to have fun with a souffle. And what I do is put it in a small dish, tie a collar round so that it comes up really high, and it looks more spectacular when you take it to the table. You'll also see that that's been very well buttered, and it's had a little dusting of Parmesan cheese just to make a lining. So now all I'm going to do is put the souffle mixture into the souffle dish, and then it can go in the oven. And whilst I'm pouring it in, just gently pour it in, and you'll find it'll come up about 1 inch above the dish. I'll explain the oven temperature. It needs a hot oven, gas mark 6 or the equivalent, and the souffle will cook in about 45 minutes altogether. And I always like to be optimistic, so I put it on a low shelf, just so there's enough room for it to really rise. In fact, when I tie a collar around it like this, I call it mile-high souffle, which I know is an exaggeration, but it does have a lovely, spectacular effect. Now, when you've got it into the souffle dish with a little collar around it like that, what you can then do is just ease it away from the edge with your finger of the paper. And if you do that all the way round, sometimes, not always, sometimes it gives you a little sort of hat on top of the souffle. And now finally I'm going to sprinkle on some Parmesan cheese, roughly about a tablespoonful, and then put it in the oven, leave it there for 45 minutes, and the next thing you'll see is the finished souffle. Now, because of the paper collar, you'll see here we have a spectacular rise. And all we're going to do now is just take off the string. Where's the string? Here it is. In fact, I'm going to cut that with the scissors. And then peel off the paper carefully. And if you find the souffle stuck to the paper, just use a knife like this to pull it away. And doesn't that look just absolutely amazingly wonderful? And now you can see why the small dish gives you this lovely, spectacular rise. And then I'm just going to cut a slice out now so that you can see what it looks like. And it should be really squidgy on the inside. You need it sort of slightly moist on the inside to get the full benefit, and then this lovely crusty bit on the outside. So let's just take that out now for you to have a look at the actual texture. There we go. We'll just have another bit there to make the portion right, a bit of squidge on the edge. And then I'll just turn it round now so you can see the actual texture there inside. And that's what I call mile-high souffle. I know it's an exaggeration, but it's pretty good. From one spectacular vegetarian recipe, now to another. Now, you've probably heard of an apple tart tatin in France. Well, this is one that's made with red onions and thyme. Begin by preparing some red onions. Cut them in half from stem to root. Get a 9-inch oven-proof pan really hot. Add an ounce of butter and a teaspoon of sugar. Then add a few sprigs of thyme. Now add the onions cut side down and fit any gaps with quarters of onion. What you have to do here is think jigsaw puzzle. Then add about a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar, a tablespoon of chopped fresh thyme, a good seasoning of salt and pepper, and then give it 10 minutes cooking with the heat high. Then cover and place in a medium oven, gas mark 4, for 50 minutes. After that, remove the foil, place it over direct heat and bubble away until all the juices become syrupy. Now cover the onions with a circle of short crust pastry made with cheese and herbs.
Place it in a preheated oven, gas mark 6 or the equivalent, give it 25 minutes cooking time. When it's cooked, just loosen it all around the edges using a palette knife, then on a flat board, turn the pan upside down. The tart will fall out, and don't worry about any escaped bits of onion because they can just be reincorporated. So there it is, red onion tart tatin. Right, so the next recipe I want to show you would either serve 4 people as a first course or 2 people as a light lunch or supper dish. And it involves what I think is a very special vegetable, and that's an aubergine. But you need to get an aubergine that's got good long length, because what's going to happen to it is it's going to be cut into slices, thin slices like this. And I've cut one, and I'm just going to cut the last thin slice off and show you what happens to the rest. And the aubergine, you need 1 for this recipe. The aubergine should weigh between 12 and 14 ounces. So that's the last slice going on the tray. And then the next thing you do is I've chopped the first slice, and I'm just going to chop the second slice now. And these are going to form part of the stuffing. So as soon as you've chopped the end pieces, these are on an oiled baking tray, and this is about 12 by 16 inches. And I'm just going to, first of all, brush them with olive oil and then put some pepper on them. So a little bit of really nice extra virgin olive oil is good on these. And then what's going to happen to them, after they've been oiled and had some pepper, is they're going to go into a preheated oven, and the oven is preheated at gas mark 4 or the equivalent, a medium oven. Now, no salt at this stage, because salt encourages the moisture to come out, and we don't want that to happen. The salt goes on a bit later when we put the stuffing in. So they're going to be popped into the oven now for just 15 minutes, because what I want to do is get them softened so that we can easily put the stuffing in. Now, over in my frying pan, I've got a medium onion that's been finely chopped and a clove of garlic. And they're all going to soften in 1 tablespoon of olive oil, together with the little pieces of aubergine. And the initial cooking for the aubergine and onion will be approximately 5 minutes, until they've softened and just turned slightly golden. Right, well, after 5 minutes, they will have turned a little bit golden and softened. And if you think the pan looks a little bit dry, you can just add a tiny bit more olive oil. And then we're going to add the rest of the ingredients. And I've got here, this is 3 tomatoes, and they've been skinned, de-seeded and chopped. So we'll put those in first. And just to enrich the tomato flavour, I'm going to use some tomato paste. This is sun-dried tomato paste, which has a really lovely flavour, and it's quite widely available now. 2 teaspoons of that. Stir that in with the tomatoes. And then I'm going to add 6 anchovy fillets, and these have been drained from their oil and finely chopped. And I've got a rounded tablespoon of capers. These are small capers. These are quite special ones, actually, because they've actually been preserved in balsamic vinegar. Finally, some basil. And I've got about a tablespoon of basil leaves here, and I'm just going to tear the basil leaves because they don't need to be chopped too small. Just tear them up, add them to the pan. Turn the heat down now to a gentle heat, and leave all that to cook for another 5 minutes. And then when it's cooked, remove the pan and let it get cool, because you want it to be cool enough to handle. What you need for the tomato stuffing is about a dessert spoonful per slice. Taste it first to check the seasoning. Arrange that along the centre, leaving a gap at each end. And now another ingredient that we haven't spoken about yet, another very Italian ingredient, and this is mozzarella cheese, which has a lovely melting consistency, and there's 5 ounces in the recipe altogether. Now when you've got the filling, on the slice like that, all you do is roll it up. And what you do is take the rounded end first and just roll it over quite lightly. You don't have to press very hard, quite lightly like that. And then you just place it in a well-greased baking dish. And next, just give each one a little brushing with oil on the surface. And it's going to have a topping now. And the topping I'm using is over here. And this actually is 1.5 level tablespoons of breadcrumbs and 2 level tablespoons of grated Parmesan cheese. So we're Italian all the way from beginning to end. Now just sprinkle an equal amount of that on top of each aubergine, stuffed aubergine slice. And then that goes into the oven, same temperature as before, medium oven, gas mark 4 or the equivalent, and they'll have 30 minutes cooking time. And here are the cooked stuffed aubergines. And for a first course, I would serve 2 of these for 1 person. You see all the cheese stretches. So there goes 1. And now we'll just take another one. 2. And just send it to the table garnished with a little bit of basil. So that's Italian stuffed aubergines, and now we're moving from Italian cheese to French cheese, and I want to show you a warm Rockfort cheesecake served with pears dressed in vinaigrette. First you need to make a base with 4 ounces of breadcrumbs, 1.5 ounces of pecorino cheese and some melted butter. Then you bake this in the oven for 10 to 15 minutes at about gas mark 5. While that's happening, begin to make the filling using 3 size 1 eggs and 8 ounces of curd cheese. Beat it all together till smooth. Then add 4 ounces of fromage frais and 6 ounces of Roquefort cheese. After that, a tablespoon of fresh snipped chives. Taste and season with a little salt and freshly milled black pepper. Then give it all a final stir. The base should now be really crisp, so just pour the mixture in on top. Then scatter a few finely chopped spring onions over the surface. Bake in the oven gas mark 4 or the equivalent for 35 to 40 minutes. Then take a ripe but still firm pear, make a little slit through the stalk to guide you, and then slice the pear in half. Remove the core, then place it on a hard, flat surface and using a sharp knife, cut it in thin slices, leaving the stalk intact. Serve each pear half with a slice of warm Roquefort cheesecake and a spoonful of balsamic vinaigrette. Well, the next recipe I want to show you would make a really nice main course at any vegetarian meal. This is called black-eyed bean cakes, and you start off with some black-eyed beans, which are these here, which are rather cute little beans. But they have to be soaked first. So what you do is you put them in a pan, cover them with cold water and leave them overnight to soak. But if you forget to do that, there is another measure, because what you can do is you can bring them up to the boil them for 10 minutes, turn the heat out and leave them to soak for 2 hours. So that's a sort of shortcut soaking. There's lentils in this as well, green lentils, they don't need soaking, and in fact there's 4 ounces of each in the recipe, and a flavouring of herbs, which is bay leaf and thyme. Now when the black-eyed beans have soaked overnight, or in the shortcut method, they swell up and they become sort of twice their size. And then you pack them into a saucepan with the herbs and the lentils, cover them again with water, fresh water this time, bring them up to the boil and cook them for about 45 minutes. And in 45 minutes, by magic, here we are, they look like this. And they're quite sort of soft and quite squidgy. And what I'm now going to do is mash them. But first of all, I'm going to use a fork. Now, if you like, you can do all the mashing with a fork. It doesn't actually take that long, but there is a little shortcut method here, and that is mashing them with the electric hand whisk. So I've just broken them up now. You can see they're becoming a puree, And I'm just going to finish off with this. Right, that's the basic mix for the black-eyed bean cakes. Now we're going to add some vegetables, and over here I've had a pan heating with a tablespoon of oil, and it's looking good and hot now. And I'm going to add to it 1 carrot that's been chopped, a large carrot that's been chopped finely. This is a red onion, a medium red onion. This is a small red pepper, been chopped in the same way. And this is a green chilli that's been de-seeded and chopped, one of the milder fat chilies, de-seeded and chopped. And here is a chopped clove of garlic. Turn the heat down to medium and cook them for about 6, maybe 7 minutes until the vegetables are tender. So there we are. Now the vegetables are tender and they've got nice crusty toasted edges to them. So we're going to take those over now so that they can join the lentils and black-eyed beans. There we are. And now we're going to have some more flavourings in here. First of all, mace. And I'm going to use 1/4 teaspoon of mace, 1 teaspoon of chopped fresh thyme, and 1 tablespoon of sun-dried tomato paste. A good seasoning of salt and freshly milled pepper. Now this all has to be combined together, and then as soon as the mixture's cool enough to handle, you can form it into cakes. Take a handful like that, a little bit more, and then just press it together with your hands. Give it a good sort of firm press. And then the next stage is to give them a coating. Now what I've got here is whole wheat flour, and all I'm going to do now is just coat that in whole wheat flour. But you could use beaten egg and fine breadcrumbs, or if you live in an area where there's a Jewish community, you can use matzah meal, which is lovely. It's not very widely available, but it makes a lovely coating. And then what you do with those is you fry them in hot oil for 3 minutes on each side, and then you serve them with a delicious sauce, which I'm now going to show you. And the recipe is called onion and ginger marmalade, and you start off with 12 ounces of onions, and they're thinly sliced, very thinly sliced into rings. And the first thing you do is you put 2 tablespoons of oil in a pot like this, bring it up to really high temperature, and then brown the onions. That'll take about 6 or 7 minutes in hot fat to get them to this stage, which is nicely sort of caramelized at the edges. And now they're going to have some more ingredients added to them. First, ginger. And this is a dessert spoon of freshly grated ginger. And then I've got some sprigs of rosemary here. 3 sprigs like that, and you can just break them up a little bit and take them out before you serve it. And it's an unusual combination, but it works really well, ginger and onions. And then I've got 2 tablespoons here of dark, soft brown sugar. So that'll go in next. And that's followed by some liquid. And the liquid I'm going to use is 8 fluid ounces of dry white wine, stir that in, and that's followed by 3 tablespoons or 2 fluid ounces of white wine vinegar. So you've got some sweet and you've got some sharp. Now you need to turn the heat down to its very, very lowest setting. If your lowest setting isn't very low, you can use a heat diffuser. And then finally, it's going to have some seasoning, some salt and some freshly milled pepper. And then after 1 hour and 20 minutes, that will have reduced down to a sticky marmalade consistency. So after 1 hour and 20 minutes, this is what the ginger and onion marmalade looks like. The onions reduce down to a lovely sort of melted, mellow consistency, and the flavour is absolutely superb. And
Although this goes very, very well with the bean cakes, it also goes with lots of other things as well. It's a generally really nice sauce to serve with lots of different kinds of food. So that's a real winner of a vegetarian recipe. Now I'd like to show you some menus for entertaining vegetarians. We begin with a 5-star first course. This is a light, crisp pastry shell filled with a concentrated wild mushroom mixture and a softly baked egg. This is a classic old favourite. It's moussaka, only this time made with vegetables, aubergines and 2 types of lentils. It's got a ricotta cheese topping and I promise you won't miss the meat. This is an oven-baked risotto made with roasted and sun-dried tomatoes, a hint of saffron and then served with shavings of Parmesan cheese. And now something for a vegetarian supper party. This is a strudel made with gorgonzola picante cheese, mozzarella, apples and leeks, and then the whole thing is encased in a lovely crisp phyllo pastry shell. Well, I hope you enjoy making all of those recipes, and I hope you'll come back next time when we're doing a programme all about how to make pancakes and marmalade. Hello and welcome again. In today's programme we're going to be making pancakes and marmalade. And we're going to start off with pancakes, and that means making a proper pancake batter. And to do this you start off with a nice big bowl, steadied on a tea towel here to keep it steady, and 4 ounces of plain flour which has been sifted into the bowl. And then what I'm going to do is just make a well in the centre of the flour and drop 2 large size 1 eggs into the centre. So 4 ounces of plain flour, 2 eggs, then we're just going to have a pinch of salt. And then the liquid I'm using is going to be 7 fluid ounces of milk, which is already measured here, and to join that 3 fluid ounces of water. So that's the liquid. Now I believe the best way to make a pancake batter, if possible, is to use one of these, which is an electric hand whisk. And what you do is switch on and start combining the eggs into the flour. So as you whip the eggs in the centre there, the liquid begins to incorporate the flour all round the edges. Now you can make this batter, if you like, with a fork, a lot of hard work, or a balloon whisk, or you can actually use a food processor, but sometimes a food processor, you can get a little clog of flour on the blade, and that's not very satisfactory. So I think overall an electric hand whisk is best. Now when it begins to look stiff, then you can start to add your liquid bit by bit with the beaters still running. We can increase the speed a bit now too. What you need to end up with is a nice, smooth, lump-free batter. And what happens as you begin to incorporate all the liquid, you find that some of the flour stubbornly sticks to the edge of the bowl. So stop halfway through. Take a rubber spatula like this and just get all that flour into the centre so that all the lumps can be whisked in. As soon as the batter's completely smooth and lump-free, it's going to need one more ingredient, and then we can make the pancakes. And the other ingredient is this here. Now in a saucepan I've got 2 ounces of melted butter, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of that to the batter, which will give it a nice bit of moistness, and just stir it in. And then next to me here on the hob I've got, over a gentle heat, a pancake pan, and this is 7 inches in diameter. I'm going to turn the heat right up now. This is a traditional pancake pan. People buy one of these, it lasts a lifetime, and you always make your pancakes in this.
But you don't have to have this. Any good solid frying pan 7 inches in diameter will be all right. But this is what this looks like. And in good kitchen shops, you can buy little sort of handle cozies, which make it easier to handle. Now, what you want is to have the pan looking very, very hot, as it is now. And then you need to lubricate it. So what I do is I roll up some kitchen paper like this into a little wadge, and then dip it in the rest of the melted butter, and then just lubricate the pan. And now you can see how hot it is. Next thing you do is turn it down to medium. It needs to be hot to begin with, then down to medium. And to make our first pancake, we're going to use 2 tablespoons of batter. Immediately the batter's in, just eke it round the pan like that. You usually find that when you make your first pancake, you need to sort of practice one. It doesn't quite, as you can see there, I haven't quite got enough batter there to cover the base of the pan. But you just need to get the feel of the amount of butter. But what you need to remember is 2 tablespoons is about right for 7 inches in diameter. Then you count up to 30 seconds and have a little peep, have a palette knife ready. And when it looks brown, just take the palette knife and flip it onto the other side. And then give it another 30 seconds. And then when that's done, you just carry on making pancakes. And the good news is that pancakes freeze divinely. So if you're in the mood, you can switch the radio on, make several lots of batter, and just make a whole batch of pancakes for the freezer, and just bring them out as and when you need them. In a moment, I'm going to show you some nice pancake recipes. But this is a traditional pancake. So we'll just turn it onto the plate like that. And then the next thing it needs is lemon and sugar. But if you're going to serve them all straight away, if you're not freezing them, then you need to put the plate over a pan of simmering water. And then as you make each pancake, you put a sheet of paper to stop them sticking together, greaseproof paper or silicone paper. Or you can have everybody sitting at the table and just waiting, and you can just make the pancakes and serve them. They can eat one and then they can eat another one. Either way, the way to eat them traditionally is to give a generous sprinkling of caster sugar first, and then a good squeeze of lemon juice all the way over the surface of the pancake, and be really, really generous with the lemon juice. Then just roll it up like that. A little bit more sugar, a little bit more lemon juice over the top, and garnish with another piece for people to squeeze over if they want even more lemon juice. Now I'm going to show you another pancake recipe.
These are apple crepes with calvados, and you begin by coarsely grating a large Granny Smith apple. Then you toss the grated apple in 2 tablespoons of calvados and leave it aside to soak for 10 minutes. The pancake batter is plain flour, buckwheat flour, flavoured with cinnamon, and it's beaten up with eggs and creme fraiche. Then to the batter you add the soaked apples and calvados. These crepes are quite small, so just use 1 tablespoon of batter. Then once it's crisp at the edges, turn it over and cook the other side until golden brown. To serve the crepe, set light to 3 tablespoons of calvados warmed through in a small saucepan. Pour it all over the crepes. Then add just a sprinkling of caster sugar. And as they go to the table, add some well-chilled pouring cream.
Well, earlier in the programme I told you how divinely basic pancakes freeze, so now I'd like to show you some recipes. If you've got a stack in the freezer, it's nice to pull them out and make some really nice recipes. And the first one I want to show you is an Italian recipe, and this is called pancake cannelloni. And I have a friend who lives in Umbria, and she's told me that in that part of Italy, they sometimes make their cannelloni with pancakes instead of pasta. And now I've made it like that. I think it's actually much better. Now you start off with 12 pancakes, and then you need a quantity of this, which is ragu bolognese. Now to make a really authentic, classic ragu bolognese,
You need to start with 2 medium onions chopped, 4 cloves of garlic and 5 ounces of chopped pancetta. These should be browned in 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. And then the meat I'm using is 1 pound of minced pork, 1 pound of minced beef and half a pound of finely chopped chicken livers. These have all been browned in olive oil first. Now you add the contents of 2 tins of Italian chopped tomatoes and then 2 tubes of concentrated tomato puree. Half an ounce of basil leaves go in next, torn before they're added. Then half a bottle of red wine. Then 3/4 of a whole nutmeg freshly grated. A seasoning of salt and freshly milled black pepper, then transfer it to a low oven, gas mark 1, without a lid and give it 4 hours long, slow simmering. By this time the sauce will have reduced down and really concentrated in texture and flavour. Now you can put it into polythene bags and freeze it for later, or you can make pancake cannelloni.
And what you do is you just put a tablespoonful, like I've done there, onto a pancake and just simply roll it up. And then just tuck the ends over like that and place it in a gratin dish, an oven-proof gratin dish. And I said before, this makes 12 altogether, and that will feed 4 to 6 people. Some people can eat 2, some people can eat 3, depends on the appetites. Tuck the edges over like that and fit them all neatly into the dish. Now the next ingredient is this one here. This is grated mozzarella cheese, 3 ounces, and I'm just going to sprinkle the mozzarella cheese around the pancakes. And while they cook, this sort of melts down to a lovely divine creaminess that goes very well. And then after that we need some bechamel sauce, and I've got here 3/4 of a pint of bechamel sauce or white sauce, and this has been made by the all-in-one method, where you put everything in the saucepan, butter, flour, milk, and then you just whisk it all together. It's flavoured with bay leaves and nutmeg, which is the Italian way of making it. And that goes over the pancakes, and spread it over a little bit and give the dish just a little shake like that to get a good coating. And then finally, the other ingredient is this, and this is 1.5 ounces of grated Parmesan cheese. And that goes over the top, and this will go into a hot oven, gas mark 6, and it'll take about half an hour to get really nice and brown and crusty on the top and bubbling around the edges. There's a little bit there that hasn't quite gone over the pancake, so I'll just sort that out. And now I'd like to show you another recipe for pancake cannelloni. This one is without meat, and this one is called pancake cannelloni with spinach and 4 cheeses. And we've got 4 beautiful star Italian cheeses that we're going to use. The first one is a ricotta. That's a whey cheese, and that is very light, and it's got a lovely sort of lactic flavour. Next door, its stronger cousin is gorgonzola. Very creamy, but nice and salty and lots of gutsy flavour. This one is mozzarella, which will give a lovely creamy texture to the finished pancakes. And then this one, the great Italian star of all time, which is Parmesan. And make sure that you get always Parmigiano Reggiano. This is the stamp, because that's the real Parmesan cheese, and it does have a much superior flavour to the other kind. So, to make our pancakes, once again, you start off with a bechamel sauce. This time it's a pint of bechamel sauce. I just wanted to show you this, because if you make it in advance and you don't want to get a skin on it, what you do is just cover it like that with cling film, and then you'll find you won't get a skin on it. And this bechamel is made exactly the same way as the other one. But what we're going to do now, if you don't have any meat, you have something else special, and that is this. And this is 2.5 fluid ounces of double cream. So this is going to be a really creamy bechamel sauce. So that'll just be worked into the rest of the sauce. Right, that's the sauce. Now we're going to move on to the spinach. And what I've got here is 1 pound of spinach, and that's been cooked in a saucepan with just a knob of butter and then drained and chopped. And I'm going to add now to it, first of all, the ricotta cheese, 5 ounces of ricotta. And then I've got 5 ounces of gorgonzola. And when you cook the spinach, don't forget to give it a good squeeze to get all the liquid out of it before you put it into the bowl. And here I've got Parmesan cheese, 2.5 ounces of Parmesan. And then I've got a bunch or a packet of finely chopped spring onions. And all I'm going to do now is just mash that all together with a fork to get it all thoroughly combined and evenly mixed. And then this will be the filling for the pancakes. What happens is it just gets a little bit sort of stiff and claggy, as you can see. So what you do is before you actually stuff the pancakes, you add some of that lovely bechamel sauce, about 1/4 of it altogether. Give that a final mix. And that's the filling now ready for exactly the same amount of pancakes as before, 12 pancakes, lovely thin pancakes, the way I showed them, just 2 tablespoons in a 7-inch pan gives you the right kind of pancake. And now what we'll do is rescue the spoon from the sauce over here and put, again, roughly the same amount as we did with the bolognese, about a tablespoonful, and then roll in the same way as we did before, over, tuck the edges under like that and place it into the baking dish. We'll just do one more. Now, the cooking times for both are exactly the same. Is you preheat the oven, gas mark 6, and you cook them for about half an hour. And now, again, I'm going to sprinkle on some mozzarella. And I've got 4 ounces of mozzarella here, and that's just going to be tucked in, on, and around the pancakes, which gives that lovely, when you serve it, that lovely sort of stretchy cheese. Finally, that lovely creamy sauce is going to go on, exactly the same way as it did before. And I've just remembered something that I should have told you, but never mind, it's not too late, and that is when you make cannelloni and you're using a dish like this, make sure it's very, very well buttered. Now, just spread that over a little bit to make sure it covers the pancakes. And then finally, some more Parmesan cheese, because that's one of the 4 cheeses, and that's going to give it a lovely crusty top. And this time we've got 1.5 ounces. There we are. The next thing we're going to see is the cooked cannelloni. What I didn't tell you before is if you've got little individual heat-proof bowls like this, you can actually cook 2 pancakes at a time. They'll fit in nicely, in which case they'll take 20 minutes to cook, and that will be one very nice portion. But now we'll have a look at the larger one, which has had its full cooking time. There we go, nice and brown and crusty on the top, and bubbling all around the edges. And I think really 2 pancakes is about right for one person, so we'll find 2 pancakes now and just serve them out. And you'll see the mozzarella that's melted becomes all lovely and creamy and stretchy. So that's pancake cannelloni with 4 cheeses. Right, well now we're going to move on from pancakes to making homemade marmalade. And it's about this time of the year, in the depths of winter when everything else is a bit dull and dreary, that we see the arrival of these lovely fruits. These are Seville oranges from Seville in Spain, and they're the only oranges that you can make real proper marmalade from. And the reason you can make marmalade from Seville oranges so successfully is because the fruit of the oranges and the skin is very, very bitter. They don't look very attractive. They've got sort of very knobbly, rough skins, and you wouldn't want to buy those to eat, and you wouldn't want to eat them either. But because making a preserve requires a large amount of sugar, if you've got bitter fruits like these and you put all the sugar in, you've still got something at the end of the day that has that sharp, tangy flavour that can't be matched by any other conserve in the world. Well, homemade marmalade always tastes a lot better than any shop-bought marmalade, so now I want to show you how to do it. Begin by simmering 3 pounds of washed several oranges, 2 lemons in 5 pints of water for about 3 hours. Then, using a slotted spoon, remove the fruit to a bowl. Take the oranges, which are now very soft, and cut them into quarters. Scrape off all the flesh and pips and put these into a saucepan. Then add 2 ladles of the poaching liquid to the pulp and boil for 10 minutes. While that's happening, cut the orange skins into strips. The size is up to you, but don't use the lemons. Return this chopped peel to the poaching liquid in the preserving pan. Now line a sieve with some muslin. Take the pulp mixture, which has been allowed to cool, and strain it. Firstly, using a wooden spoon, but then gathering up the muslin and squeezing the liquid out. This provides the pectin that's going to set the marmalade, so you need to squeeze every last drop to set it properly. Now stir the liquid, orange peel and pectin, cover with a cloth and leave overnight. Next day, reheat the mixture. Then add 6 pounds of sugar that has been warmed in a low oven for 10 minutes and stir it in very thoroughly. Don't let it boil until the sugar is completely dissolved. You can check this by looking for sugar crystals on the back of the spoon. Now you can bring it up to simmering point and leave it to simmer and bubble away until it goes really dark. This will take about 3 to 4 hours. To test for a set, place a spoonful on a very cold plate, then give it a push with your finger. If you get a crinkly skin like this, then the marmalade is ready. Ladle into some warm jars and label the next day when it's completely cold. So here it is, dark, chunky marmalade. No other country in the world can make marmalade like we can. And for a change, here's another marmalade recipe. This one's made with suntinas, or you can make it with any of the tangerine family, and it just gives something slightly different, a variation. If you want a real wake-me-up marmalade, this is the one for you. This is lemon and lime and has a lovely, sharp, tangy flavour. Once you've made some marmalade, how about a marmalade recipe? This is marmalade bread and butter pudding, and you start off with day-old slices of bread, spread them thickly with butter, and then spread them even more thickly with marmalade. Now place another slice on top, spread some more butter on top of that, and cut the sandwiches into quarters and arrange in a baking dish. The mixture I'm pouring over here is 10 fluid ounces of milk, 2.5 fluid ounces of double cream, 3 ounces of sugar and 3 eggs. Scatter the surface with grated orange zest, demerara sugar and chopped candied peel. Then bake in the oven at gas mark 4 for 30 to 40 minutes until it's puffy and golden and the top is crunchy. Then serve the pudding straight from the oven with chilled pouring cream. Now we're going to make a recipe from the past, something that will give us a little bit of sparkle on a cold, frosty, wintry night. Because this is called crepe suzette, and crepe suzette were very popular in the 60s, and too popular in fact, and everybody sort of got a bit bored with them. But I think it's nice to have a revival because in fact I remember how lovely they were, and I'd like you to know how lovely they were. Now this time we've got the same pancake batter that we made before, but this time it's a sweet batter, so it's going to have in it the grated zest of an orange and also a tablespoon of caster sugar to make the sweet batter. Otherwise the ingredients are the same as before. I'm just going to give that a little mix, And crepe suzettes are very thin pancakes, if possible. So what I want to do is make a pancake now. We're just going to lubricate the pan and then try and use fractionally less batter this time to make the pancakes as thin as possible. About 1 3/4 tablespoons instead of 2 tablespoons. Now you don't have to worry if it doesn't quite fill the pan. They don't have to be perfect round pancakes, because what we're going to actually do in a second is fold them up. So don't worry if you've got, as I've got there, a few gaps. Same 30-second wait, then just see how the pancakes are doing. That's not quite ready yet, so what I'm going to do is just get rid of my bowl here and bring in the rest of the pancakes. And you should get 16 if you make thinner ones like this. Now we're just going to turn that over onto its other side for a few seconds. It's very, very thin and very, very lacy, but that's how it's supposed to be. Then, as soon as that's ready, it's going to join the rest of the pancakes over here. And now we're going to switch frying pans, because this time you need to have a large frying pan. This one's about 10 inches in diameter. And have the heat turned up to high. And we're going to make a sauce. And the sauce is an orange sauce, a sweet orange sauce. First of all, 5 fluid ounces of freshly squeezed orange juice. That's about 3 large oranges. Also the juice of a large juicy lemon. And then here I've got the zest of the lemon and the grated zest of the orange. And the next ingredient is 2 ounces of butter, and that's going to go in to join the citrus juices and melt into them. And then we've got caster sugar again, another tablespoon into the sauce. And because you're going to spoil your friends on a cold, dark evening, we're going to use 3 tablespoons of Grand Marnier liqueur, which is a lovely sort of caramel orange flavour. Now just get the butter melted into the sauce, and as soon as it's melted, we're going to add the pancakes. Now the butter's melted, we can turn the heat down and begin to add the pancakes. And what happens is you put the first pancake in, and really all you're doing now is reheating the pancakes gently in all those lovely citrus juices. Just sort of baste it a little bit so that you get it completely submerged. Then what you do is you turn the pancake over and make a half, and then you turn it over again and make it into a sort of triangle shape like that. Then move it over to the side and put your next pancake in and do exactly the same thing. And as they begin to be folded and soaked in the sauce will begin to disappear, because it will all be soaked into the pancakes, giving them the most wonderful citrus flavour. Well, now you can see the pancakes have soaked up all that lovely juice which is impregnated in them, giving wonderful flavour. So we're going to have a bit of fun here, or we're going to try to. What we're going to try and do is flame the pancakes as they go to the table. Now how you do this is, first of all, you warm a ladle, get it really warm. It needs to sort of look as if it's almost up to simmering point and feel quite hot when you touch it with a finger. Then you need to grab your pan firmly in one hand, set light to the brandy and carry it to the table, and it'll just carry on flaming in the ladle like that. And then when you arrive at the dining room table, make sure you've got the lights out, and you just pour it over the pancakes while everybody goes, wow. So there we are, that's Memories of Pancakes Past, but I hope you'll come back and join me next time. We're doing a programme called Stars from the East, and the stars are Oriental dishes, so I'll see you then. Question, what do you do on a cold, wet, wintry day?
answer is you just lock yourself in the kitchen and you go on a little trip to the Far East and do some Oriental cooking. That's what I'm going to do. And I want to share with you, first of all, a little trip over to China. That's the first port of call. And I want to show you one of my oldest favourite Chinese recipes. And this is called hung shao pork. It has three distinct advantages. The first one is that it uses a cheaper cut of pork. This is actually lean belly pork. And sometimes you can buy it in a flat piece or you can buy it rolled up and tied with string, in which case you just unroll it. And then you cut it into little sort of 1-inch cubes like this. But you'll notice that I've left the skin on, and that's actually very important for the recipe because the pork is going to be cooked slowly, and the gelatinous properties in the skin enrich the sauce in a very, very special way. So leave the skin on, you don't have to eat it. And then what you do is you just place the cubes of meat, skin side down, into a medium-sized casserole. And I told you there were three advantages to this. First one is that you're using a cheaper cut of meat, but you're making something that actually tastes really exotic. The second one is that it cooks long and slow, which is unusual in Chinese cooking, because sometimes Chinese cooking can be a bit of a panic affair, because you've got to stir-fry everything at the last minute, and it's quite difficult. But this, having one long, slow-cooked dish, makes it much more manageable. Right, now that's the pork. Next, the exotic bit, and first of all I'm going to use 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and just sprinkle that over the meat. And then I'm going to also add 1 tablespoon of water. And then the next exotic ingredient is this one here. This is cinnamon, whole cinnamon stick. This is about 2 inches in length, and I'm just going to break it up a little bit and scatter that in. Next, some ginger. This is fresh ginger root that's been peeled and then chopped, and in tiny little cubes like this, and it's about a dessert spoon of chopped ginger. Just sprinkle that all over the pork. And then this wonderful ingredient here, which you may not have used before, this is called star anise. And it's tiny, it looks very pretty because it's shaped like a star. And although that's very tiny, we're only going to use that one piece there. It gives off a lovely, subtle aniseed flavour. You can't identify the flavour, but it's everything you think when you think Chinese food. And now we're just going to put the heat on and place the casserole over the heat. I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of salt, not too much because there's salt in the soy sauce. And then as soon as that comes up to simmering point, you put a lid on and then you turn the heat to its lowest setting and let it cook really slowly, just barely bubble, for 45 minutes. Then after 45 minutes, turn the pieces of pork over. This is so that you can get the juices right round each piece of pork. And then you add 2 more ingredients. First of all, a teaspoonful of sugar. And then this is dry sherry. And I'm sure they don't use dry sherry in China. They probably use Chinese wine, but it's very good with sherry. And we're going to put in 3 tablespoons. 1, 2, 3. And then another 45 minutes, and don't forget to just turn it over again during that time. Now I want to show you some stir-fried green vegetables to go with the pork. And what I've got here is a nice, heavy, solid wok. This one's suitable for going onto electricity or gas. And I've got 2 tablespoons of ground nut oil in there. And as soon as that's really, really hot, I'm going to add, first of all, a clove of garlic, which has been cut in little shreds. And here I've got a 1-inch piece of ginger, peeled and also cut into shreds. I'm just going to stir those around in the oil for about 30 seconds. And then over here, this is 4 ounces of broccoli. And before I put it in, I just want to show you, it's been cut into very little small slices like that. And also the stalks have also been cut into diagonal thin slices. So the stalks go in as well. And then along with the broccoli, I've got 4 ounces of shredded cabbage. This is Savoy cabbage here. That goes in next. Stir that around a bit. And lastly, a leek. This is a large leek, and it's been separated into leaves, washed, and then cut again into little diagonal pieces. So in goes the leek. And that's going to be stir-fried for 1 minute altogether. And the principles of stir-frying are the vegetables can hit the sides of the pan and cook extremely quickly. But while they're cooking, the advantage of stir-frying is they're not losing any of their sort of crunch and texture. Now what we're trying to do is serve a complete Chinese meal. So what happens is 15 minutes before the end of the cooking time for the pork, you put some rice on to cook, because that'll take 15 minutes, some plain rice. And then at the end of the pork cooking time, remove it from the heat, leave it in the casserole, and stir-fry the vegetables. And then at the end of the stir-frying, you'll serve the pork with the rice. Now what I'm going to do now is add spring onion. The white part has been cut into slices and the green part into shreds. So that'll go in next. And the last thing you do, when they've all begun to sort of shrink down a bit and look as if they're cooked, is you need to add some steam. Might need to do a bit of tasting. And the steam I've got here in my jug is in the shape of 1 tablespoon of soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of dry sherry, and 2 tablespoons of water. Just let that bubble down and reduce. And as I said before, do a bit of tasting to see if the vegetables are done to your liking. Add salt or more seasoning if you need it, and then just serve the pork and the rice and the vegetables together.
Well, that was our first taste of the Orient. Now we're going to zip off to Singapore. This is Singapore stir-fried noodles, and you start by putting a heaped tablespoon of dried shrimps and 6 Chinese dried mushrooms in boiling water for half an hour. The noodles, rice noodles, sometimes called thread noodles, should be soaked in warm water for 15 minutes. In a wok, cook a chopped clove of garlic and a teaspoon of grated ginger in 3 tablespoons of brown nut oil. Add a medium chopped onion. Then add the soaked mushrooms sliced and drained. The shrimps. Add 2 rashers of streaky bacon chopped very finely. Stir and leave everything to cook slowly for 15 minutes. 3 more ingredients here: 2 ounces of cooked finely shredded chicken, 1 dessertspoon of hot Madras curry powder and 2 ounces of fresh prawns. Next, the drained noodles. Now we need some liquid, and in this case it's mushroom soaking water, 2 tablespoons, 1½ tablespoons of soy sauce and 2 tablespoons of dry sherry. The last ingredient is chopped fresh spring onions. Then just toss it all together, and there you have it, Singapore stir-fried noodles. Now we're going to zip from Singapore and visit Japan. And Japanese cooking is now becoming much more popular in this country, and lots of Japanese restaurants, lots of Japanese ingredients are beginning to appear. And I want to show you perhaps one of the most famous Japanese recipes of all, certainly the most popular in the West, and that is teriyaki steak. Now, first of all, I'd like to just run through some ingredients for you. In Japan, the main ingredient in all their cooking and at the table is soy sauce. And Japanese soy sauce is the best soy sauce in the world because it's made by a naturally fermented method. And on the tables, you always see lovely, elegant little teapot containers full of soy sauce. The next ingredient is this. This is mirin. This is a light, sweet white wine. That's used a lot. Next to that is the stronger white wine. This is called sake. And you drink sake either warm or cold, and you also use it in the cooking. This is a very, very special ingredient, this one here. It's expensive, but it's absolutely gorgeous. It's called sansho pepper, and it's made from the seeds of the sansho tree, and they're dried and powdered down, and it's sprinkled over food. Now, another very popular ingredient in Japan is this one, which is mooli radish. And I'm going to be showing you how to prepare that in a minute. These you're already familiar with, ginger and chilies. And now we're going to make teriyaki steak. Over here, I've got 2 steaks, and the steak to use should be either top rump or rump steak. And you should have the steak quite thick, about 1 inch thick, if possible. Now, to make the marinade, we start off here by putting 2 tablespoons of soy sauce into the dish. And that's going to be followed by 4 tablespoons of mirin, and that's the light, sweet wine. This one you never drink. This one's only used for cooking. 4. And then the stronger one, the sake, we're going to use 2 tablespoons of that. 1, 2, and we'll warm the rest up later to have when we eat the steak. And then the next ingredient are these here. This is a crushed clove of garlic and 2 teaspoons of grated fresh ginger. And then one more ingredient, and this is where I part company with the Japanese. They put a lot of sugar in their teriyaki, but I only like 1 teaspoonful. But if you want it a bit sweeter, you can have it a bit sweeter. Now just mix all the marinade ingredients together. Now, what we're going to do is pop the steaks in there. It's quite nice if you can do it the night before and give them a good long marinade, because that gives time for the flavours to develop. But if you haven't got that amount of time, then a couple of hours, even an hour, would be all right. Put them in, press them down, turn them over like that, and leave them for as long as you can. Now, once the marinading is complete and you're ready to cook the steaks, the first thing you do is you heat a tablespoon of oil in a nice heavy frying pan like this, and you slice 2 peeled cloves of garlic in little slices like this, and then just briefly fry them until they're golden. Keep them warm, and they're going to be used later on as a garnish for the steak. Now, when your pan is good and hot, what you do is you take the steak out of the marinade, and then you just scrape off all the bits of ginger so that they don't catch. And then you put them into the frying pan. With the heat on high to start off with. And then you turn the heat down to medium. And what you do is you give them 4 minutes on each side if you like them medium, or 1 minute less if you like them rare, 1 minute more if you like them well done. And while they're cooking there, I'm just going to show you the garnish for the steaks. And the mooli radish, or daikon, you need about 1.5 inches of it peeled. And what you do is you grate it on the fine side of the grater. And you'll find this is used an awful lot in Japanese cooking. And it does have a lovely crunchy texture. If you like radish anyway, you'll really like this. And then with that, I'm going to grate half a green chilli. Now, this chilli is one of the fat, mild kinds of chilies. It's not outrageously hot. Now, once you've grated that, the next thing you do is you rescue what's inside the grater. And then you need to gather it up into your hands and give it a really good squeeze. And when you watch, when I squeeze it, you'll see how much juice is coming out of that, quite a lot. And then you shape it
And the traditional way to serve it with teriyaki is in a little cone shape. You need to press quite hard to get it into the right shape. And that goes onto a plate like that and is served with the steak when the steak is cooked. Now, halfway through the cooking time, the next thing you need to do is turn the steak over. Don't worry about the blackened bit on the steak, because just think soy sauce and think barbecue, and that's really how it should be. And then 2 minutes before the end of the cooking time, you pour in the marinade. And so the final 2 minutes is going to be reducing down the marinade to a sort of sticky sauce. Then, when the time is up, you take the steaks over to a carving board, and then the way to serve them is, just let me show you, the sort of stickiness of the marinade has now become a really nice sauce, quite thickened sauce. And then the way to serve the steak is to take a good sharp knife and carve it in diagonal slices like that. And then you serve it garnished with the slices of sautéed garlic and some sansho pepper sprinkled over, and a garnish of lemon and watercress. Well, now I want to share with you some more of my travel experiences, and last year I was very privileged to be able to go to Bangkok and join the Oriental Cookery School to have some lessons in Thai cooking. And today I want to share with you one of the dishes they taught me, and this is a Thai green curry with chicken. But first of all, I want to talk to you about some of the special ingredients that are now much more widely available, not only in specialist food shops, but now we're seeing them coming into the supermarkets. And the first one is this beautiful, it's almost a work of art, this, isn't it? This is related to ginger, looks a bit like ginger, but it's actually called galangal, or sometimes it's known as Siamese ginger or Thai ginger, but it has the same flavour of ginger and the same kind of texture. This is called kaffir lime, and it's a very ugly looking little lime, this one, but it has the most wonderful flavour in the peel, in the skin, in that knobbly peel. Don't be deceived by what it looks like, because it has the most beautiful flavour. You don't use the juice, you only use the actual outer zest. These are chilies here, and these are what are called bird's eye chilies. They are very fiery and very hot, and you can use them more or less according to how you like to eat curry. Then we've got garlic, which we're familiar with, but these here are special little Thai shallots, pink and shiny, and they have a lovely sweet flavour. The milder chilies, the fat chilies they use in Thailand, we're more acquainted with here. And then this here is Thai basil. It doesn't actually taste the same as the basil we know. It has quite a different flavour, but it's very important in the cooking. Coriander we're all now familiar with since we did the summer collection where coriander featured highly. One other ingredient is coriander stalk. That's often used, root. That's often used in Thailand as well. But I haven't got any of the root today, so I'm going to show you an alternative. Next, green peppercorns, whole green peppercorns, and these in Thai cooking are used fresh from the bush. But it's winter and they're not available now, so we're going to use these which are preserved in brine. That's okay. This is actually called palm sugar, and it has a similar flavour to our brown sugar, and if you can't get palm sugar, you can use brown sugar. Lemongrass, again, we use that on the summer collection, and that's treated in the same way as leeks or spring onions. This is shrimp paste. And all that is literally pounded shrimps, nothing else, pounded shrimps and salt. This is coconut, and that features very largely in Thai cooking. It's quite hard work, coconut, but I'm going to show you a shortcut to that. And this here is fish sauce. This is in all Thai cooking. The most important ingredient probably in the Thai kitchen is this fish sauce. Now, if you were a Thai person living in Thailand, what you would do to make your curry paste, which is what we're going to make first, a green curry paste, you would take this pestle and mortar and you would sit down somewhere comfortable and you'd spend probably the whole morning pounding the ingredients together. But Here, we're not used to doing things like that, so I'm going to just show you a shortcut of how to make green curry paste. Now here, I've got the ingredients all lined up on a little saucer, and they're going to be blended with this, which is sort of a mini processor instead of the pestle and mortar. First, I've got 5 slices of the galangal, the Thai ginger. Instead of coriander root, I'm using coriander stalks. This is a heaped teaspoon of coriander stalks. And then I've got 5 of these lovely little pink, shiny Thai shallots. I've got 8 bird's eye chilies. This gives you quite a good amount of fieriness. This is the kaffir lime peel, and you can see it's been taken away from the lime and then just shredded very finely. 3 cloves of garlic next, and a teaspoonful of shrimp paste. And then next I've got some spices, and spices aren't used a lot in Thai cooking, but they are in green curry. And I've got half a teaspoon of whole cumin seeds, and these have been roasted, dry roasted, as we did earlier in the series, and then pounded with a pestle and mortar. And this is whole coriander seeds, half a teaspoon again, that have been treated in the same way. And then I've got a large stalk of lemongrass, and this has been trimmed and sliced, and it's been soaked in lime juice, just to kind of soften it up a little bit. And I'm going to put that in with the lime juice. And now I'm going to show you this lovely little gadget. You just stick this bit on top and then switch on, and off it goes. Right, we'll just remove the blade. And if you're wondering why my curry paste isn't green, it's because I've cut the chilies down. In Thailand, 24 green chilies, that would be quite green. But as I've said before, you can have 24 chilies if you're up to it. Now we're going to make the curry, but first of all, I want to show you one of the main ingredients, and that is creamed coconut. And we're going to cheat because we're going to use tinned coconut. And if you open the tin upside down, what happens is you can pour the thin milk off and see all the thick settled at the bottom there. And the recipe calls for 1.5 tins, so I already separated the half tin, and this is the whole tin, which is now going to be spooned into my bowl, using a spatula to get every last little bit out. So you begin to make the curry by turning the heat up high underneath a wok, and when it's really hot, you start by frying the thick coconut cream. And so we'll add that now. Now that's quite hot. So what you've got to do is you've got to keep stirring so that it doesn't catch on the bottom, because you need the heat quite high. And you go on stirring until the coconut cream begins to separate and turn oily. Now you can see it's reduced down quite a bit, and the oil is separating out from it. And when that happens, you then add your curry paste next. So now we'll add that. Make sure you get every last little bit. And then the most wonderful thing happens. The aromas are just indescribable, so I won't try to describe them. And now what we're going to do is add the thin coconut milk, and just add that little by little, keeping the heat high and letting it reduce down slightly. And after that, we're going to add 2 more ingredients. We'll just get rid of the bowls. And the first one is fish sauce, and this is 3 dessert spoons. And then a teaspoonful of this sticky palm sugar. And if you can't get palm sugar, don't worry, you can use brown sugar. Stir that in, let the sugar melt a bit, and then we're going to add the chicken. And the chicken, in this case, is already cooked chicken. In fact, in most of Thai cooking, all the meat is cooked beforehand. We had it in Thailand with duck, slices of duck, shreds of duck, which is very nice. Now I'm going to add green, these are the green peppercorns, and this is 3 dessert spoons. And then it's going to have a garnish. I'm just going to let it, turn the heat down and let it just simmer gently while I show you the garnish. And the garnish is, you remember the knobbly little limes I showed you, kaffir limes? Well, these are actually kaffir lime leaves. And they're rather pretty. They come as twins like this, and you need to separate them. And altogether you need 7 leaves. And the way to shred them for the garnish is to put them on top of one another, like that. And then roll them up very tightly into a tight roll. And then when you've got your tight roll, you take a very sharp knife, sharpest knife you've got, and then just shred them as finely as you possibly can. The finer the better, really. I won't go right to the end because I've actually got some that are already here. And here you can see the other garnish. This one is the fat, mild chilli we saw earlier on, and this also has been de-seeded and shredded finely. You can use the whole chilli or just half if you don't want to keep the heat too high. Right, so that's the garnish first of all, the first garnish. Turn the heat out now. And then we'll just spread that about a little bit over the surface, which is now beginning to give it some colour. And then finally, this is the Thai basil. This is 1 ounce of Thai basil, and that is just scattered over the top and just lightly turned into the mixture. You don't have to actually shred the leaves or break them. Just by the time that gets to the table and it's served, they will have just softened slightly in the heat, and that's how they should be. And that is Thai green curry with chicken.
Here's another simple but very good Thai recipe, again made with coconut milk. This time we used tiger prawns and chunks of pineapple. This is a little Japanese side salad. It's marinated cucumber, which is then sprinkled with sesame seeds. This one's Chinese. It's a stir-fry made with crispy beef and vegetables. Well, I hope you enjoyed our little trip to the Orient, and I hope you'll come back and join me next time when our programme is called Mashed Potatoes and Other Revivals. See you then. Hello and welcome again. Well, the first part of our programme today is about winter vegetables, and I think one of the stars of winter has to be mashed potatoes, and a lot of other people agree with me.
Mashed potato is one of my 2 favourite things to eat, the other being toast. Mash is soothing, it's comforting, and it's easy to eat.
They're my favourite food. I like them whipped up nice and light and fluffy.
I think when you die, if you go to heaven, the first meal you get is mashed potato. And I think because it'll be so lovely and comfortable, and it's the ideal, perfect comfort food. It's like just being in bed.
I actually like to make my mashed potatoes with this variety, which is called Desiree. It's got a yellowish flesh, as you can see inside, and it has bags of potato flavour, which is what I want, is a really good flavour. Now, you start off by peeling the potatoes, and I just wanted to make sure that you understood how important it is to have a really good quality potato peeler. Because what that does is it just takes the very outer wafery skin away, and the flavour and the nutrients are closest to the skin. So you can see there the peeling is wafer thin, and that's the ideal way to cook potatoes, with just the outer skin taken away and a really good quality potato peeler. Then the next thing you need to do is you need to cut them into even sized chunks, and here they are in my saucepan. Don't cut them too small, otherwise they sort of go with the water and split up, and if you cut them too large they'll cook on the outside and not on the inside.
Now we'll put them on the heat and turn the kettle on, because I think when you're cooking root vegetables, I think they need to be in the water as briefly as possible. The more time they're in the water, I always have this feeling, the more flavour goes. So I always put boiling water on them. This is just coming up to the boil now. And don't put in too much water. You want enough water to just barely cover them. Too much water, and again, I think you rob them of flavour. So just right up to the tops. It doesn't matter if a few little bits are sticking out. Salt, I use 2 teaspoonfuls, and we've got 2 pounds of potatoes here, and that will be enough for 4 to 6 people. Then as soon as they come up to simmering point, turn the heat down, keep them on the simmer for about 20 to 25 minutes. Now, the very best way to test if potatoes are done, or any vegetables, I think, is to use a flat skewer like this one here. And what you need to do is you need to put it into the thickest part of the potato, and if it slides in easily, as that has, we'll try another one just to make sure. If it just slides in easily with no resistance, then the potatoes are soft and ready to be mashed. So what we'll do is take them over to the sink, and the next stage is to drain the water off. If they're not quite cooked, you will get lumps and nothing can remove them. After it's drained, you let the water drain off, and then you pour them back into the hot saucepan, because what we're about here is keeping them as hot as we possibly can. So back they go. Then the next stage is to add a little bit of pepper. Remember, they've got some salt in them. We'll do a bit of tasting later. 2 ounces of butter. Don't forget, 2 pounds of potatoes, so that's 1 ounce a pound. And then I'm going to start off with 4 tablespoons of full cream milk. Mashed potatoes is not the time for skim milk, I don't think. I think it's about getting everything as creamy as possible. And now you will read all kinds of recipes in all kinds of recipe books about how to mash potatoes, and I've done them all, and I can assure you that this is actually the best way, is to just use an ordinary electric hand whisk. Now what I'm going to do first of all is just break them up slightly with a fork, like that, just to start them off. And the butter will just melt in as the whisk goes round. Then switch it on slow speed at first. And the slow speed will just continue to break them. And then you just keep moving it round until they're all broken, and then you can switch on later, higher, to get them finally into that lovely whipped state. I'm just going to move a few of the lumps into the middle because they've escaped around the edge, so carry on. So quite gentle at first. And then as you feel them begin to give under the whisk, then you can go up to a higher speed and get that lovely, smooth, velvety whipped effect. Here we go. Now at this stage, you ought to do a little bit of tasting because they might need more salt, a little bit more pepper. And today we're going to make the luxury version, and the luxury version is that you add 2 level tablespoons of creme fraiche. Now this could be single cream or double cream, but again, I'm giving you my personal choice here. I think creme fraiche just gives a wonderful flavour. And then back with the mixer to just get the creme fraiche whisked in. So now all I'm going to do now is switch my mixer off and just get some mashed potatoes out so that you can just see the lovely, beautiful texture of them there. Lovely and creamy and smooth and fluffy. One of life's real luxuries. Now that's basic mashed potato, and I just want to show you now a few more versions.
This is mashed potato with garlic infused olive oil. You heat 8 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil for about 50 minutes with 3 peeled cloves of garlic. After that, add it to mashed potatoes, and just as bread takes up the flavour of the olive oil, so does the potato. Italy meets Britain here. This is fresh pesto sauce bought in tubs from the supermarket, and if you combine it with freshly cooked potatoes, you end up with something called pesto mash, which is absolutely divine served with fish. This is Irish colcannon potatoes, and what I'm doing here is adding sautéed shredded green cabbage and sautéed spring onions to creamy mashed potato. If you want to really indulge yourself, you can add more melted butter at the end, but even if you don't, it does have a wonderful flavour, and I think it's perfect for serving with some really good bangers.
Well, now we're going to move on from mashed potato to lots of other ideas for winter vegetables. And the first one is parsnips, beautiful vegetable. And if you like roast parsnips, sometimes at this time of the year, you begin to get a little tired of them and want to change, and this is a change. This is roast parsnips with a maple and mustard glaze. Now you start off with a roasting tray in a hot oven, gas mark 7 or the equivalent, and you heat 2 tablespoons of a flavourless oil, like ground nut oil, on the roasting tray. And you preheat it for about 8 minutes. Protect your hands when you get it out of the oven because it's very, very hot. And then while that was preheating, I steamed some parsnips. And this is 3 pounds of parsnips. And then you just place the parsnips in the hot oil, putting the round side down for the moment. And then once the parsnips are in the hot oil, turn them over so that they're all rounded side up, like that. And there's a reason for doing this, and that's because the glaze actually goes on better if the round side is up. So that's an important little point to remember. And also for this recipe, I think it's nice to have the parsnips cut nice and chunky, as you can see there. Now they'll go back into the oven now. First of all, a little bit of freshly milled black pepper. Same high temperature, gas mark 7 or the equivalent, and the next stage is 25 minutes on the highest shelf. Just before the 25 minutes is up, you can make the glaze, and this is very simple. All I've got here is a tablespoon, a rounded tablespoon of grain mustard, and to that I'm going to add 1.5 tablespoons of this, which is pure maple syrup. So that's 1.5 tablespoons. And then I'm just going to mix that together. Couldn't be simpler, couldn't be easier. But it's a lovely combination of flavours. So now we'll just take them out of the oven and put the glaze on. The only important thing I have to tell you is that when you're buying maple syrup, just look for the word pure, because there are sort of imitation maple syrups around and they don't have that wonderful flavour. And then they go back into the oven, same temperature, and they'll need another 10 minutes. But now I'd like to show you a few more winter vegetable recipes.
This is broccoli and cauliflower, which is oven roasted with garlic, olive oil and crushed coriander seeds. This is fennel, which is a mild aniseed version of celery. This has been cooked with a cider and cider vinegar glaze to a dark, lovely caramel, and then it's garnished with fronds of fennel. And what's in this surprise parcel? It's celery, cooked inside just in its own juices with a vinaigrette, herbs and some finely chopped pancetta. If you want to draw out and concentrate the real sweet flavour of shallots, simmer them very gently for about 1 hour and 15 minutes in red wine and red wine vinegar, which cooks down to a lovely sticky glaze and tastes wonderful.
Now, in this part of the programme, I want to give those of you who haven't made it before a lesson, a basic lesson in how to make proper homemade mayonnaise. And you start off with 2 large egg yolks. And what we're going to do is incorporate 1/2 pint of oil into the egg yolks. And first of all, to help us do that, I'm going to add some mustard powder. These are large size 1 egg yolks, and this is a large rounded teaspoon of mustard powder. The mustard powder gives flavour to the mayonnaise as well.
So does this. This is a crushed clove of garlic. Now you can leave that out if you don't like garlic, but I think it does make a big difference to mayonnaise. Then I'm going to add a teaspoonful of salt and some freshly milled black pepper. Some people prefer to use white pepper in mayonnaise, but I don't mind the black speckles. I think they look very nice. Now we'll switch on, first of all, just to get those ingredients blended together. And I'll explain all the principles as we go. You need to have something narrow to make it in. A 1-pint pudding basin is ideal, or this jug, which has got a narrow base, because the beaters need to be all the time in contact with the egg yolk. The reason for that is that we're going to add the oil drop by drop, literally. So watch this. Just one little drop, like that, and then another little drop. Now, before you get up and go, let me tell you that I'm not going to be here all night. I have actually timed this, and it does, all in all, take about 7 minutes, which I don't think is a great deal of time for what is one of the greatest classic sauces ever invented. It's a beautiful sauce. Now, the oil I'm using is ground nut oil, because I find olive oil is too harsh for mayonnaise. But what you can do is experiment with flavour, and you can add a little bit of olive oil, replace a part of it, say 1/8 of it, with olive oil if you like the flavour. Now, about halfway through, the mayonnaise begins to look really lumpy and thick, but that's actually a good sign when it looks really lumpy like that and stiff, and it looks as though it won't take any more olive oil because it's got too thick. So what you do then is you add another ingredient, and this is white wine vinegar. And what I'm going to do is add about half a dessert spoon or a teaspoon now. Switch on the beaters, and that will slacken it down and make it smoother. I didn't add enough, so I'm going to add a little bit more, another half a dessert spoon or a teaspoon. And that will turn it pale and softer. So what we'll do now is just let you have a look at how that lumpy consistency has now gone into something paler and smoother. And now we just carry on as before, only this time you can begin to add the oil in slightly larger drops, as you'll see. Now I'm just going to add just a touch more vinegar to taste, another teaspoonful, because that's quite lumpy again, and what the vinegar does is it cuts the oil flavour, but it also makes the mayonnaise lighter. Last lot of oil's going in now, and be very brave and just let it sort of pour in. And what we have now is the finished mayonnaise. That you might consider, let me just show you the consistency first of all, but this is what a proper mayonnaise should be like. It's sort of almost gelatinous. It just sort of sits up like that on the top of the spoon, and it is absolutely amazingly wonderful. But if you still find that's a little bit thick, you can lighten it by adding 2 tablespoons of boiling water, and that will lighten it down even more. But I'm not going to do that with this mayonnaise because I'm going to use this mayonnaise to make a special recipe I want to show you. And that recipe is the first of a little group of recipes that I've been having a lot of fun with lately, and that is trying to revive some of the things I remember in the 60s when I was very young. And the first one is prawn cocktail. Now, prawn cocktail, like many other 60s recipes, has got very bastardized over the years, over the decades. And what I want to do is go back and show you, in case you don't remember, how it should be made. So the first ingredient is proper homemade mayonnaise, which we've just made, and we've made half a pint, and this will make enough cocktail sauce for 6 people as a first course. And the next ingredient is tomato ketchup. That might surprise you, but this actually is a very special tomato ketchup. It's an organic one, it hasn't got any sugar in it, and it's really true to a proper tomato flavour. And we need 2 tablespoons of that in our cocktail sauce. Next, we need to have some Worcester sauce, and it's a dessert spoon of Worcester sauce altogether. And good old-fashioned Worcester sauce, but has a lovely kick in the flavour. This also has a kick, a few drops of this, which is Tabasco. And then don't put any pepper and salt in because we had plenty in the mayonnaise, just do a bit of tasting. Now just mix all those together, couldn't be simpler. And then one last ingredient, and that is a dessert spoon of freshly squeezed lime juice. Now I think in the 60s that probably would have been lemon, but lime improves it. So that's cocktail sauce for 6 people. And the way to serve it, I think, is like this, with shredded cos lettuce. It needs to be a crunchy lettuce, shredded rocket, and here I've got little cubes of avocado pear. And you need a pound of prawns, and you divide those between 6 people, and just place them on the bed of lettuce leaves. Cover it with the cocktail sauce, and then sprinkle a little bit of cayenne pepper over the top. And then I'm just going to garnish the side of the dish with a prawn, like that. So that's Prawn Cocktail 2000. Now I'm going to sneak in another one of my favourite 60s starters, and that is just egg with homemade mayonnaise. Well, now I want to show you another recipe from the 60s. This is the first recipe I ever wrote and the first recipe that ever appeared in print. It's beef in beer, but I've updated it, and it's now beef in designer beer.
This is 2 pounds of braising beef that's been cut in cubes and nicely browned. That goes into a casserole and is followed by 12 ounces of onions that have also been browned and cut in chunks. Now add flour, a tablespoon just to soak up all the juices. Then add some seasoning, 2 bay leaves, and a few sprigs of fresh thyme. Now the beer, and you use 15 fluid ounces of one of the strong continental beers. Which one? Well, whatever's got the nicest label. Stir, bring it up to simmering point, then pop it in a slow oven, gas mark 2, for 2.5 hours. Just before you serve it, cover the surface of the casserole with baked bread spread with grain mustard, then top that with grated Gruyere cheese, then flash the whole lot under a hot grill until the cheese is brown and bubbling.
Well, no 60s revival meal would be complete if we didn't have something sweet. And the something sweet I want to cast your minds back to is that very popular dessert of the 60s called Black Forest Gateau. And although it has been cheapened over the years in the sort of factory versions you buy in the shops that are really cheap, the real thing, which is a beautiful concoction of light chocolate cake, chocolate mousse and cherries and cream, is just absolutely out of this world. So I think it's about time it had a revival, and I'm calling it Return to the Black Forest. And you start off with a very, very light cake mix. We're going to actually roll up the filling inside the cake, and this cake is made in a tin 13 by 9, and it's made with cocoa powder and eggs and no flour, so that it's very, very light, just sugar, cocoa powder and eggs. And what you do is you bake it very briefly, and when it comes out of the oven it's puffy, and then it sort of sinks down like this. Now what we're going to do first of all is, you can see the tin is lined with baking parchment, which is non-stick. I'm going to turn it out now onto another piece of baking parchment, but first of all I'm going to sprinkle this with cocoa powder. And when I mention cocoa powder, this must be proper cocoa powder, not drinking chocolate that has other things in it as well. And what we're going to do is just turn that out and peel off the lining paper, first of all. And the way to do that is to pull it directly towards you. Once you've released it, just release the sides first, like that, and then pull it directly towards you, like that. And then it comes off quite easily. That's it. And now I hope you can just see how lovely and light and spongy the texture of the cake is. Now we're going to give it some filling. And first of all, I want to talk to you about the cherries. Now the cherries must be Morello cherries because they're bitter cherries, not too sweet. And the best way to buy Morello cherries is in a jar like this. And then what you do is you empty the contents of the jar into a sieve, drain off the syrup, and then you leave them to soak overnight with 2 tablespoons of liqueur, cherry brandy in fact. 2 tablespoons of liqueur has been on the cherries overnight, and now I've drained the liqueur off, and the first thing I'm going to do is take about a tablespoon of that, that's still got some cherry juice there in it, and just sprinkle it very, very lightly over the surface of the cake, and you can see that it soaks in quite easily. So that'll give it an extra sort of moist, squidgy centre. And the rest of the liqueur is going to be used later on. Now the next part of the filling is this, and this is just a plain and simple chocolate mousse made with eggs and chocolate, dark chocolate. And what I'm going to do with that now, you make the chocolate mousse well ahead, and you'll need to put it in the refrigerator to sort of firm up, then take it out of the refrigerator and let it come back to room temperature. And the reason it needs to come back to room temperature is because what you've now got to do is spread it over the mixture. Now if you think this is really wicked, you haven't seen anything yet, because after the chocolate mousse, the next thing we're going to use is this. This is 8 fluid ounces of double cream that's been whipped to a spreadable consistency, and that goes on next. Don't let the cream go to the edge though, just keep it in to another rectangle in the centre, because otherwise it makes it difficult to roll up. If you take it right to the edge, it all squidges out, which isn't what we want. Right, now for the cherries, which, remember, have been soaked in cherry brandy. They're going to go on next, and they go on top of the cream. And just in case you're sitting there trying to count up the calories, let me tell you that this is meant for special occasions. It's meant to be a celebration or a party dessert, and it will actually feed about 10 or 12 people altogether. Now, give it all a little pat, and what we're going to do is roll it up. But remember, the sacrifice of not having flour in the cake means that it is very delicate, so we're not going to mind if we get any cracks. But we're going to start off by just flipping that bit over, and then lifting the paper like that, and going over again. Be brave. And there, what you've got there is a roll. Now there is a couple of cracks here, but we're not going to worry about the cracks because we're going to see to those, and a couple of escaped cherries which we'll just stick in at either end. Right, the reason we don't have to worry about those cracks is because we're going to put yet more ingredients together, and I want to show you how to make chocolate curls. We're going to cover the whole thing with curls of chocolate. But first of all, they need to stick onto it, and the way you get them to do that is you take really, really good top quality Morello cherry jam like this, a tablespoonful, sieve it, and then melt it in a saucepan. And when you've melted it, you add, remember the other tablespoon of liqueur that we had the cherries soaking in? Well, you put that in with the jam, and then you use that, which has the most wonderful flavour, Morello cherries again, to paint all over the surface of the cake so that the chocolate curls will stick. But how to make chocolate curls? Well, what you do is you take 3½ ounces of dessert chocolate and melt it in a pan over barely simmering water. And when it's melted and smooth, you pour it onto an upturned plate that has a diameter of about 6 inches. Now, this is just an ordinary dinner plate. You could use a flat marble surface or even an upturned baking tin, but you need to have the chocolate sort of set like that. So what you do next is put it in the refrigerator and give it 45 minutes. Put the timer on, because if you leave it longer than 45 minutes, it'll be too hard and you won't be able to make your curls of chocolate. And the way you make them is with this little gadget here, which is in fact a cheese slicer. And these are available everywhere, quite easy to find. And now what you do is you put the cheese slicer flat, absolutely flat on top of it. Don't dig in, be very, very gentle, and then just pull it along like that. And as you pull it very, very gently, you'll get curls of chocolate coming away like that. So there's the first curl. Then you put them into a polythene box and keep them refrigerated, because what happens with them is they actually get very, very sticky and they melt very quickly. So we'll just do another one now for you to see. Flat on the surface and holding very, very gently. And if you make a mistake, and you find it's gone a little bit too hard or it's a little bit too soft, and look, this is all you get. You just get little bits like that. Doesn't matter, the little bits like that still look good, so you can't really go wrong, just needs a bit of practice. So paint the cake with the sealer, the Morello cherry sealer, cover it with chocolate curls, and then serve it cut in slices, and listen to the gasps of delight as people eat it. Well, there we are. That's mashed potatoes and other revivals. Hope you enjoy them. And I hope you're going to come back next time. It's our last programme, and in that programme we'll be going back to good old-fashioned baking. See you then.
Although there may be signs of spring outside, it is still winter, and the best way to cope with a really grey day is to lock yourself away in the kitchen and do some home baking.
Well, we're going to start off with a recipe for fresh lemon curd cake, and I think this is one of the greatest cakes, and the good news is it happens to be one of the easiest. It's made by the all-in-one method, and I'll explain that as we go along. First of all, you need 6 ounces of self-raising flour, and that must be sifted to give it an airing, and I've done the sifting. Then, this is an easy cake made by the all-in-one method. So what we're going to do is add a bit of extra baking powder, even though it's self-raising. 1 level teaspoon of baking powder will give it a little bit of help in the rising. Then we've got 6 ounces of butter here, and the butter must be very, very soft, room temperature. So if it's a cold day, or if the weather's cold, take it out of the fridge the night before so it's as soft as this. So in goes the butter, 6 ounces. And then we're going to use 3 large size 1 eggs. 1, 2, 3. And one thing you can remember is when you're making layer cakes like this, sometimes called sponge cakes, sometimes called sandwich cakes. If you're using 3 eggs, everything else is 6 ounces. So 6 ounces of caster sugar next, 6 ounces of butter, 6 ounces of flour. And then I'm going to use, because it's a lemon cake, a tablespoon of lemon juice and the zest of a whole lemon, a large lemon. So that goes in next. And all you do now is you take an electric hand whisk. You can use a wooden spoon and a little bit more elbow grease, but it's easier if you do it like this, and just whisk all that together. Now you'll see why you need to have the butter really, really soft. And this method, the all-in-one method, is the easiest type of method to use. Sometimes making a classic Victoria sponge cake, I'll just switch that on a bit higher. Sometimes if you're making a classic Victoria sponge cake, you cream the butter and the sugar together first, and then you add the egg little by little. And sometimes it curdles, and it's a bit difficult for beginners. But for beginners, this one, I would say, is foolproof. Now, when you finish mixing it, what you should have then is a mixture that will, if you take a spoon and just pick it up like that and go like that on the edge of the bowl, the mixture will just drop off quite easily, and that's the way to tell. Now, if it doesn't drop,
you can add a spot more liquid. In this case, it could be lemon juice or it could be milk. Now, the next important thing are the cake tins. And what we're going to do is divide the mixture between these two cake tins here. And while we're doing that, I'm going to explain to you how important it is to have the right size cake tin. And if you've ever made a cake and it's failed, I get a lot of letters from people who do that, make cakes and they fail. And usually the reason is because the cake tins are not the right size. So when you're making a cake, when you're making this cake, you need to have 2 7-inch sandwich tins. And that is 18 centimetres, sorry. 7 inches, 18 centimetres. And you can also make this mixture in an 8-inch tin, which is 20 centimetres. But the reason I'm putting it in the smaller tin, the 7-inch tin, is because we're going to split the cakes horizontally afterwards. Now just smooth it over, and you'll see also, I didn't mention, that what we've got at the bottom here is the base of the tin, just the base of the tin, lined with silicone paper, sometimes called baking parchment, because that will stop it sticking and it's easier to turn out. So just smooth it over like that, and these go into an oven preheated to gas mark 3 or the equivalent, and they'll take about 35 minutes to cook and become soft and springy to touch in the centre. And then the next thing you do is you turn them out onto a wire cooling tray and you peel off the base paper. And the way to peel the paper off is to just get the end and pull it directly back like that, and then it comes off quite easily instead of trying to sort of lift it off. Now what we're going to do is take one of the cakes and slice it horizontally, because what we're going to do is make this into a layer cake with layers of lemon curd. So to get the layers, it has to be sliced horizontally. And you need a good sharp knife to do this. A good sharp bread knife will do, or this is perfect because it's a palette knife with a serrated edge. This is a gem of a knife, this one. So what you should be doing now is sitting down on a chair and looking at this eye level, but I haven't got a chair here, so I'm just going to see if I can get the knife through fairly evenly. There we go. And you can just have a look inside and see how nice this all-in-one cake is, and very easy to make. We'll slice the other one in two later on, but now we're going to need something to sandwich the cake together with, and this is going to be classic homemade lemon curd. You start off with about 1 inch of water in a saucepan like this, and then you fit a bowl over the water, and in the bowl you can see here I've got the juice and the grated zest of a large juicy lemon and 3 ounces of caster sugar. And the first thing I'm going to do is just blend those together over this pan of water and let them get quite warm. And as soon as they're warm, I'm going to add some butter. And while I'm waiting for it to warm, I'm going to also tell you that the large juicy lemon I'm using is one of these over here, which is a large unwaxed lemon. And that seems to provide enough zest and enough juice to make a lovely sharp lemon curd. As that's warming through, I'm going to add 2 large eggs, and these are size 1 eggs. And then I'm just going to whisk the eggs into the lemon and just wait now for that to become nice and warm. And just test that with your finger, and you can see it's warmed up a little bit now. And then you add 2 ounces of butter, and this is unsalted butter, and it's been just cut up into little cubes, so that I can beat the cubes into the rest of the mixture quite slowly. It actually takes altogether about 20 minutes to make lemon curd. And you have to be prepared not to stay with it for the whole 20 minutes, but to stand
nearby and just come up and give it a little whisk. Because what will happen is all that will blend together, and that gentle heat underneath will gradually thicken it. It's rather like making a custard, really, a real custard. And in 20 minutes' time, it'll become the right consistency. And 20 minutes later, you have your beautifully thickened, wonderfully fresh, lemony tasting lemon curd, and then all you do is remove it from the heat and allow it to cool, and then you use it to sandwich the cake together. And we've got one here. You can see the 4 layers and the lemon curd in between, and for the finishing touches, we're just going to add a little bit of icing, lemon icing, on the top there. And this is actually just 2 ounces of icing sugar. And to get it to this consistency, you need about 1.5 teaspoons of lemon juice. And what we're going to do is put that now onto the top of the cake, and then just spread it out very, very thinly. Don't worry if some of it falls down the sides of the cake, because that can look quite nice. But all we want is that just that lovely sort of glacé topping, which will just give the final lemon flavour to it. And then when you've got the icing all over it, that'll probably drip down a little bit later. The final touch, the finishing touch, is this, which is grated lemon zest, which has been actually done with a proper lemon zester, so you get nice little curly bits like that, which makes it look pretty. And I would say that is probably the nicest lemon cake in the whole world. I hope you agree. Now we're going to move from lemons to chocolate and have a look at chocolate brownies. First of all, break 2 size 1 eggs into a bowl and beat them together. Then add 2 ounces of chocolate and 4 ounces of butter that have been melted together over hot water. Sift in 2 ounces of plain flour next. Then add a level teaspoon of baking powder and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Next, add 8 ounces of granulated sugar. And then beat the mixture again. And now the nuts, 1 ounce each of macadamia, Brazil, pecan and hazelnuts. And these have been toasted in the oven for 6 minutes at gas mark 4. Now pour the mixture into a baking tin, and this measures 7 inches by 11 inches. Then shake the mixture to level it out. Bake for 30 minutes at gas mark 4, then leave to cool before cutting into squares. You should get 15 squidgy chocolate nut brownies altogether. Well, if you've never done any home baking before, I think probably the best thing to start off with is a batch of homemade scones, because they're easy and they're quick. And I'm going to show you 2 kinds of scones today, a savoury and a sweet. And we're going to start with the sweet version. This is called rich fruit scones. And in my basin here, my mixing bowl, I've got 8 ounces of self-raising flour and 3 ounces of butter. And the butter's at room temperature. And the first thing I'm going to do is begin to rub the butter into the flour. Now, once that resembles a fairly even looking mixture, you then add some sugar. And the sugar I'm going to use is caster sugar, and this is 1.5 ounces of caster sugar. So that's going to go in next. And I'm just going to mix that with my knife into the rest of the ingredients. And I'm going to add just a pinch of salt. And here I've got 2 ounces of mixed dried fruit. And if I could explain the mixed dried fruit, it's actually raisins, currants, sultanas and little bits of candied peel, which give a nice flavour. So that's going to go in next. And now the liquid I'm going to use is first of all a beaten egg. So that'll go in next. And start to mix the liquid with a knife. And then
with the egg, I'm also going to use another ingredient, and that is this here, which is buttermilk. And you can buy buttermilk in cartons from the dairy counter in the supermarket. And I might need 2 tablespoons, I might need 3. So you never know when you're using flour just how much it's going to absorb. So start off with 2, and then if you need another one, add another one. Now, if you can't get buttermilk, don't worry, you can just use ordinary milk. I think probably whole milk would be the best. And I think that does look a little bit dry, so I'm going to go for another half a tablespoon of buttermilk. And then keep going with the knife, and then finally finish off with your hands. There we are. And what we should have at the end is a nice moist mixture that comes together and leaves the bowl clean. Now the next thing we're going to do is roll out the dough and cut the scones. But before I do that, I just want to show you this lovely new savoury version of scones. Savoury scones are wonderful served warm from the oven, perhaps with a salad for a light lunch. And the savoury scones I'm going to make today are with feta cheese and sun-dried tomatoes and olives. Don't forget the olives. And what I've started off in here is I've got 2 ounces of whole wheat flour and 6 ounces of self-raising flour. And I've also got a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. And it's quite nice having the bit of nutty whole wheat flour in this. And if I could point out any of the pitfalls to you at scone making, it's make sure you've got self-raising flour all the time. I have done it once with plain flour because I didn't look at the packet properly, and what you end up with is sort of nasty, tough little pancakes. Now, this is going to have all sorts of gorgeous ingredients added to it now. First of all, 2 ounces of chopped sun-dried tomatoes. They've been preserved in oil. And then I've got 10 pitted olives. The stones have been taken out and I've chopped them. Then over here I've got a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper and a 1/4 teaspoon of mustard. And here I've got some feta cheese, 3 ounces of Greek feta cheese, and this has been cut into little tiny cubes. And this here is 1½ teaspoons of fresh chopped thyme leaves. So they'll go in next. And the feta cheese is quite salty, so you don't need any salt in these. Just turn the ingredients round in the flour, and then the liquid is quite different this time. First of all, it's 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. So 1 tablespoon first, and we'll just sprinkle that over, just lightly all over, and then another tablespoon. And then we're going to add some more oil as well, and that is the oil that the sun-dried tomatoes have been preserved in. 1 tablespoon of that sun-dried tomato oil. Now we'll go back to the knife and give that a light mixing, but that won't be enough moisture to bind the dough. So what I'm going to do is add what's in my bowl in front of me here, and that is a beaten egg that's been beaten with 2 tablespoons of milk. And I'm going to add about half of that because I'm not quite sure, again, just quite how much I'll need to make this into a dough. I think that's just about it now, so what I'll do is now go in with my hands, but be quite gentle because there's a lot of ingredients here, and the cheese needs to stay in nice little clumps, because then what happens is those little clumps of cheese melt in the cooking, and it's just wonderful when you come to eat it. So you carry on, the principles are the same. If you don't get all those crumbs into the dough, then you add a bit more liquid. I think we're going to do that now, just a tiny bit more, just a fraction, and then we'll be there. And the next thing then for me to show you is how to roll the dough out. But I'm going to leave that one and roll out the sweet version for you.
Now, this needs to go onto a lightly floured board, like that. And then I'm just going to shape it into a round and tell you there are 2 secrets to making scones. Well, they're not secrets really, but 2 things, 2 points that you mustn't forget. One is, as I've already said, use self-raising flour. And the other is, when you roll them out, this is where I think most people go wrong, is when you roll them out, don't roll them out too thinly. You see, that's all you need to do. You just need to roll it out like that, just to about 1 inch thick. And then you place the cutter, this is a 2-inch fluted cutter, lightly on the top, and then you give it a sharp tap like that. That's it. Out it comes. And then just flour it lightly on top and place it on a greased baking sheet. I'm just going to do one more. When you're cutting things out, you mustn't go like that. It's very tempting to twist it, but you don't. You just put it on top like that and then give it a sharp tap with your hand, like that. And there's your little scone. We'll give it a dusting of flour. The next thing they need is a really hot oven, gas mark 7 or the equivalent, and they'll take about 12 to 15 minutes to cook. Right, now I'm going to show you the savoury scones as they look when they've finished baking. And what I didn't tell you before is when you've cut them out, you then sprinkle them with another 2 ounces of feta cheese, and that melts down and gives a lovely crust to the scones when you eat them. And now I'd just like to show you what the scones look like inside texture-wise. These, the fruit scones made with buttermilk, I'll just split one open like that, are probably the lightest scones in the world. They just melt in the mouth. And what that would need, I think, is a nice bit of clotted cream and some homemade jam. Perfect. And then these over here, I think, are best served with butter. Let me just show you one of these opened out with all those lovely ingredients in them. And I think they're best served not hot from the oven, but still slightly warm. And in any case, you must always eat scones the day you bake them. They freeze quite well, but they don't keep, they don't store well. Right, that's scones. Now we're going to make a rather unusual cake. This is an Italian polenta and ricotta cake. You start with 7 ounces of polenta and Italian maize flour, and you sift it together with 7 ounces of self-raising flour, 1 heaped teaspoon of baking powder, and 1 heaped teaspoon of cinnamon. There will be some grains from the polenta flour left, so tip them in as well. Now add 8 ounces of caster sugar, 9 ounces of ricotta cheese, 4 ounces of melted butter, and 7 ounces of tepid water. Now go in with an electric hand whisk and whisk everything till smooth. Lastly, fold in 6 ounces of chopped dates that have been soaked in 3 tablespoons of amaretto liqueur and 2 ounces of chopped toasted pecan nuts. Now spoon the mixture into an 8-inch cake tin and sprinkle some demerara sugar over the surface before baking at gas mark 3 for 1 3/4 to 2 hours. Here it is, polenta and ricotta cake. It has a lovely crunchy surface, but when you open it inside, you find a lovely sandy, moist texture with the flavour of amaretto, dates and pecans. Well, this is yet another cake, and this one is a very easy, another all-in-one cake. And I started off in my bowl here with all the ingredients in together. 4 ounces of whole wheat flour, 4 ounces of plain, 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder, pinch of salt, 4 ounces of butter, 2 eggs and 6 ounces of soft brown sugar. And this has been all beaten together with 4 tablespoons of milk, so that what I've got now, what I should have, yes, is a good dropping consistency. But what is the name of the cake? The name of the cake is Quick Apricot and Pecan Loaf Cake. And this is the first ingredient I'm going to add now, which is apricots, 6 ounces. These are no-soak apricots, and they've just been cut in half, so they're nice and chunky when you eat them in the cake. This here is 6 ounces of pecan nuts, and the pecan nuts have been put in a medium oven for 8 minutes and just lightly toasted. And then the next ingredient is 6 ounces of Bramley apple weighed after you've peeled and chopped it. Nice and chunky again, because that makes the cake nice and moist. And then we're going to flavour it with some cinnamon. And I'm going to put in 2 slightly rounded teaspoons of cinnamon. There's the cinnamon. Now just fold that all in together, and then, as I said before, when you make any cake at all, a sandwich cake or a sponge cake as we made earlier, or a loaf cake, what you need is to always have exactly the right size tin for the mixture. And the tin I'm using in this case, because it's a loaf cake, is a classic 2-pound loaf tin. And this is 2 pounds in weight, and it's been very, very lightly buttered. And now I'm just going to pour the mixture into it using my spatula here to get everything in. And then I'm just going to smooth it out on the top like that, get it nice and smooth, and then it's going to have a topping on it. And the topping is going to be sugar and cinnamon. But I'm not just sprinkling sugar on. What I've got here, this is sugar lumps, and they're brown sugar lumps. And what I've done is I've crushed them coarsely with 1/4 teaspoonful of cinnamon. And the reason I'm not just using sugar, but sugar lumps, is because you get sort of nice crunchy consistency on top of the cake. So we'll just sprinkle that now on top of the surface of the cake. And this is going to go into a preheated oven, gas mark 4, that's a medium oven, and it will take between 1 hour and 1/4 and 1 hour and 1/2 to cook. Now the very best way to tell if a cake is cooked is to just slide it out on the shelf and just give it a depression with your little finger like that, and if it springs back, then the cake is cooked. If it leaves an indentation, then you put it back in and give it another 5 minutes. Anyway, that one seems to be pretty well cooked, so we'll take it out. And leave it in the tin to cool for a few minutes, and then loosen it round the edges, turn it out, cool it on a wire rack. And we've got a cake here that has been cooled, so what I now want to do is just cut it in half, see that lovely crunchy topping, and just show you what it looks like inside. And there we have it, apricot and pecan loaf cake. Well, sadly, we've come to the end of our winter collection of recipes, but there is some good news as well, and that is the winter's now passing on, and summer's on its way, and we've all got that to look forward to. As for me, I've got to say goodbye, but thank you for coming and sharing my recipes with me in my home in Suffolk. All I've got to do now is go away and find some more exciting recipes for next time. Bye.